Chapter 8:10. All of this was because Yang Qindong's reputation was too great. The last time they'd met, he hadn't been able to gain the slightest bit of advantage, which had left a shadow in his heart. As soon as he saw Yang Qindong, he instinctively stood up. As soon as he stood up, he happened to meet Yang Qindong's gaze. Then, under the collective gazes of everyone present, an unexpected scene occurred. Yang Qindong, who just entered the main hall, couldn't stop himself from bursting into laughter. Ha ha ha, it seems like you've suffered quite a bit. My apologies, I couldn't control myself. I was just expressing my feelings, that's all. Not only did Yang Qindong not have the slightest intention of apologizing, he even had a mocking look on his face. Instantly the other diners all fell silent. Then when they came back to their senses, they also began to laugh loudly. This laughter caused Dong Chunhua's face to turn red. He'd been waiting for the other party to teach him a lesson. Who would have thought that when the other party came, he'd be the first to stand up in fright? Then he'd be ridiculed instead. If news of this spread, he'd probably become a laughingstock. The originally tense atmosphere was completely dispelled by this laughter. Dong Chunhua knew that there was no point in keeping a straight face, so he could only face it head-on. With a serious expression he asked, "Duke Zhongdan, the Immortal Abode is your business. Now that a guest has been poisoned by a laxative while eating here, how do you explain this?" Yang Qindong's expression also suddenly became much more serious. He angrily said, "I express my extreme indignation and anger towards the despicable people who use such underhanded means to harm my Immortal Abode's business. I strongly condemn them. If I discover anyone else doing this in the Immortal Abode, I will definitely hand them over to the authorities and give them a heavy punishment. As for the guests who have been harmed, our Immortal Abode will also compensate them appropriately. We will compensate them as much as we can to express our apologies. Sir Dong, I presume that the stewards of the Immortal Abode have already given each of your guests 200 taels of silver. Don't tell me you didn't receive it?" The words he'd said earlier were all righteous words, but if one thought about it carefully, they were all just diplomatic words. This was also a common tactic used by various countries in the future. Towards the end, it was as if they were trying to make a big issue small and a small issue into nothing. However, if one person had to pay 200 taels, 20 people would pay 4,000 taels of silver. This wasn't a small amount. Seeing Yang Qindong ask if he had received the silver, Dong Chunhua wanted to say no, but others had received it. Why didn't he? He couldn't say that he didn't want to take it, let alone that he thought the silver was too little. To pay. Of them to say to pay. To pay 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 to pay. Pay. To pay to compensate to pay 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 to pay. Of to pay a. In other words, the Immortal Abode's methods were already very fair, leaving the others speechless. When Dong Chunhua saw that the others didn't say anything after receiving the money, he knew that he was alone. Yang Qindong hadn't shown any signs of weakness. He couldn't beat the other party in words, nor could he beat the other party in a physical fight. Staying here would only increase his troubles. Dong Chunhua snorted coldly, then walked out of the Immortal Abode with his hands clasped behind his back. Only the Immortal Abode would be able to bully their customers. Only they would be able to make a second-rank official speechless and have nothing to say. Seeing Dong Chunhua leave just like that without even leaving behind a single vicious word, Yang Qindong felt as if he hadn't heard a thing. "Men, bring that person who paid 200 taels of silver to Sir Dong's residence. No matter what, we can't let him suffer for nothing." Yang Qindong's words seemed to have good intentions, which immediately drew a round of laughter from the other customers. The farce seemed to have ended just like that, but Yang Qindong didn't think that was the case. He called Yang Ning over and asked him what exactly had happened, and whether he'd already investigated the matter. Since he was going to invite the sixth young master over, he naturally had to get to the bottom of the matter. Yang Ning immediately gave him a report of what he'd just learned. "Sixth young master, this is how restaurants are. The competition is too fierce. Sometimes, when you can't win in a direct confrontation, you can't help but think of using other methods. This isn't the first time something like this has happened. Fortunately, everyone has some misgivings. Even if they use drugs, they won't use too much force. In any case, it won't harm anyone's life. However, we've still been very careful. When we're cooking and serving the dishes, we have people serving them. I've already asked them and they're all old hands. They wouldn't do something like taking someone else's money to trample on their own business. It's a bit strange that we don't have any leads at all. The restaurant industry actually had such methods of competition. This was a bit beyond Yang Qindong's expectations. Of course, he didn't know much about the restaurant industry in his past life, so it was only natural that he wouldn't be able to see through it. However, it was a bit strange that he couldn't find the culprit. Alright, we have to be more careful in the future. Who cares what other people do? In any case, our immortal abode can't participate in this kind of thing. If we want to attract customers, we have to put more effort into the taste of the dishes, the quality of the service, and the atmosphere. If we use such underhanded methods too often, we'll be struck by lightning. When Yang Qindong saw Yang Ning's anxious and self-reproachful appearance, he reached out and patted him on the shoulder. He had served the Yang clan for generations and had even changed his surname to Yang. Such a loyal person should be encouraged, not discouraged. Yang Qindong nodded emotionally when he sensed Yang Qindong's concern for him. His eyes even reddened as he said, "That's right. We'll remember the sixth young master's words. In the future, we'll continue to improve ourselves. We won't use any underhanded methods." This was just a small matter. If not for the fact that this matter involved a second-rank official, Yang Qindong wouldn't have asked about it. Yang Ning also wouldn't have bothered him over such a small matter. Now that Dong Chunhua had taken the initiative to leave, the matter could be considered to have come to an end. It was just a case of diarrhea. They'd discovered it in time and given sufficient compensation, so the matter was quickly resolved. Yang Qindong returned to his carriage and headed for the outskirts of the capital. Yongding Gate. This was one of the 12 outskirts of the capital of Baiming, and it was also the road that Yang Qindong had to pass through to reach the Yang clan manor. He had already walked this road countless times, especially when Yang Qindong had first arrived at the capital of Baiming. Because his elder sister and brother were living in the city, he would make this trip every few days. It was just that after Yang Qindong returned, his brothers and sisters all sent people to the Yang family manor to take the initiative to meet him. It was likely that they also knew that their little brother's status was different. It was somewhat difficult for him to see them, and it was also a test of safety. This saved Yang Qindong the trouble of running around. He had already met with the people he needed to meet in the capital. If there really was something, they would naturally take the initiative to look for him at the Yang clan manor. With nothing else to do in the capital, Yang Qindong returned home. Under the protection of the first guard, he left the inner city and headed straight for the Yongding Gate. It was almost the new year and the streets were bustling with people. There was an endless stream of peddlers, and the common people seemed to be spending more than half of their annual income in these few days. This made the city seem extremely lively, and there was already a festive atmosphere to it. Yang Qindong sat alone in his luxurious carriage, a sincere smile on his face as he listened to the hubbub of people outside. The common people lived and worked in peace and contentment. Wasn't this what all those who worried about the country and its people wanted to see? This was also the true reason Yang Qindong wanted to carry out a peaceful evolution. If possible, he naturally hoped to use the method of boiling a frog in warm water to influence and infiltrate the great Ming dynasty. In the end, they would become part of the new country without any signs of life. Nothing could be better than this. But now it seemed that this was just a thought. Based on what Su Yozhen, Hu Shao and Yang Guang had said, Baiming had trained so many new soldiers and built so many firearms. It was clearly impossible for them not to fight a battle. Perhaps they were feeling too full of themselves, believing that they were the strongest army in the world and could properly wrestle with the mercenaries. When facing such a person, if one didn't beat them into submission, it would be impossible to convince them with words alone. When he thought of this matter, Yang Qindong couldn't help but think of Su Yozhen, who wanted to get off the ship. Previously, the Bureau of Security had noticed that this minister's attitude wasn't as proactive as before. There were even many things that he wouldn't say if one didn't ask. This hidden chess piece was already on the verge of going out of control. Fortunately, after that night's meeting, Yang Qindong's warning had an effect. It made Su Yozhen sober up and realize that there were some things that he couldn't do even if he didn't want to do them. There were some choices that had been made and there was no way to regret it. Since that night, Su Yozhen had taken the initiative to contact the Bureau of Security as before. This was a typical example of someone who was asking for a beating. Some people were like this. The more you spoke to them nicely, the more they would ignore you. On the other hand, if you hardened your tone, the other party would be terrified. Thinking about Su Yozhen, Yang Qindong's lips curved into a smile. This was a sense of confidence after he had control of the situation. At this moment he heard a very clear hawking voice. Elixirs for sale. Elixirs for sale. Elixirs for sale. Elixirs for sale. If you eat my elixirs, you can prolong your life and stay young forever. This shout was very loud, at least far louder than the shouts of other people on the street. It also attracted the attention of Yang Qindong, who was sitting in the sedan. Chapter 8:11. Because of Yang Qindong, many items that shouldn't have appeared had appeared in advance, causing the market to become more prosperous and diverse. However, the production capacity of Qiqian City wasn't very high and there were too many merchants who wanted to get their hands on their goods. As a result, there was a shortage of goods in the Heavens Beyond Trading Company. Some people couldn't get their hands on the goods even if they had the money. Thus, some people started to learn how to fake goods. Fake goods weren't a product of a certain period of time. Instead, it was a kind of business that people were forced to do. Thus, there were many new and interesting items in the market. There were even some items that were imitations. However, these things only looked similar. When you actually held them in your hands, they were too heavy and crude. But because they were cheap, they still managed to gain a certain market share. As a result, some goods that didn't even exist in the Heavens Beyond Trading Company started to appear. However, things like immortal pills still attracted Yang Qindong's attention. Immortal pills were things that only existed in legends and were only recorded in the history books. It was as if they were just conjectures. How could they exist in this world? But now there was actually someone hawking on the streets. It was impossible not to attract attention. Gently reaching out to touch the side curtain of the carriage, he saw a man dressed like a Daoist in a bagua robe peddling the goods in his hands. There were quite a number of people gathered in front of this stall, and it seemed to be very lively. Stop for a moment. Yang Qindong was also interested and called out to stop. The carriage that was in the midst of the commotion also stopped. The group of guards also widened their eyes and looked around, looking cautious and alert. The carriage stopped and Yang Qindong walked out in large strides. He looked at Yang Si, who was waiting on the side of the carriage with a puzzled expression. He chuckled and said, "There is someone selling immortal pills over there. This young master is interested. Let's go take a look together." Since it was an invitation from the young master, Yang Si naturally wouldn't reject it. He smiled and nodded in agreement. The two of them, one servant and one master followed by a few guards, walked towards the seemingly lively stall. As he got closer, Yang Qindong could finally see the so-called immortal pill in the other party's hand. It was golden, as if it was made of gold. From its appearance it was quite interesting. "Daoist priest, how much is this elixir?" Before Yang Qindong could approach, someone in the crowd asked. "I can't say that this is a sale but an invitation. Only those who are fated will be able to obtain it. Let's put it this way, 1,000 taels per pill, no bargaining." The first part was a bit profound, but when it came to the price, the merchant's unscrupulous appearance was completely exposed. When they heard that it was 1,000 taels for one pill, the people who were originally interested in it all shook their heads. Originally they thought that if the price was right they would sell one back. Regardless of whether it was real or fake, they would just treat it as buying a fresh one. However, if it was 1,000 taels per pill, it was really too expensive. No one would spend so much money just because of curiosity. The crowd suddenly quieted down. When the Daoist priest saw that there was going to be an awkward silence, he couldn't help but say anxiously, "You guys don't believe me. This is the price. How can immortal pills not be a lot? Do you know that I met the Grand Supreme Elderly Lord in my dream? This was given to me by him. It is far from something that can be measured by money." With this explanation, some people who had already wanted to leave couldn't help but hesitate. Previously they thought that this bet was a scammer. However, when they heard that this matter was linked to immortals and the price was so expensive, they couldn't help but hesitate. But after all, it was 1,000 taels. No matter who wanted to take out this much money, they would have to consider it carefully. This actually helped Yang Qindong. He laughed and squeezed through the crowd. "Come, let me see. If it is really something good, I will take all of your immortal pills." Yang Qindong naturally wouldn't really believe that there were immortal pills in this world. He just looked at it curiously. It would be fun to buy it for his two wives to play with. When the voice rang out, it naturally attracted everyone's curious gaze. This was a rich guest coming to visit. It was impossible not to attract everyone's attention. Because of this voice, Yang Qindong also quickly passed through the crowd and came in front of the Daoist priest. Other than Yang Si, who was following closely by his side, the other guards were blocked out of the crowd for a moment. This young master is someone who knows his stuff. Come up and take a look. Seeing that there was a guest, the Daoist priest's anxious expression changed. He laughed and handed the golden immortal pill in his hand to Yang Qindong. But because there was still a stall between them, his hand still couldn't reach in front of Yang Qindong. Since the Daoist priest couldn't pass it to him, Yang Qindong reached out to take it and squeezed his body forward. Just when his arm was about to touch the Daoist priest's palm, the Daoist priest's eyes suddenly flashed a murderous intent. Then he suddenly raised his left arm that hadn't moved. A black muzzle was aimed at Yang Qindong's body. The sudden accident caught everyone off guard. Even Yang Qindong instinctively moved his body sideways in the face of this unexpected situation. And just as he moved, a gunshot sounded. The flintlock hit Yang Qindong's body. The strong recoil made his body tremble. There's an assassin. Yang Si, who was following by the side, witnessed all of this with his own eyes. His eyes immediately turned red. His right hand touched his waist. There was a Type 54 that he always carried. Daring to assassinate the young master, no matter who this person was, he must die. His hand reached behind him. Yang Si's face quickly changed. It was not because of anything else, but because his hand was suddenly pressed down by someone. That person seemed to be incomparably strong. He actually made his body unable to move at all. Since they had set up a killing trap, the Daoist priest would not be the only killer. Among the crowd there were many of his accomplices. Seeing that they had started to act, these people did not hide anymore. One by one they used their own methods. Yang Qindong was hit by a flintlock at close range and fell to the ground. Yang Si, who was the closest, was also temporarily restrained. This kind of assassination scene was seriously a first. In the past, when there was an assassination, the clues would always be discovered at the first moment and then disappear into nothingness. It was a frightening but not dangerous existence. But like this time at such a close range, it was really the first time that he was killed. If it was a normal time, Yang Qindong would still be vigilant with his qi. But today, as soon as he appeared, he shocked Dong Chunhua and made him retreat. This made him a little arrogant. Coupled with the fact that this place was in the midst of a riot and a hubbub of voices, it was even more difficult to spot the problem in such an environment. This gave the enemy a chance to succeed. Yang Qindong was shot to the ground. Blood flowed from the corner of his mouth and his face was a little pale. It was unknown whether he was alive or dead. But even so, the Daoist priest was still unwilling to die without seeing with his own eyes. He suddenly pushed the stall in front of him away, then held another loaded flintlock in his hand and aimed at Yang Qindong again. But this time the target was not his body but his head. After aiming at the target, the Daoist priest pulled the trigger. It looked like he was going to shoot Yang Qindong on the spot. Get lost. It was at this moment that a loud shout rang out. Yang Si, who had his right arm pressed down, roared angrily. All the strength in his body erupted at this moment. He endured the pain of his dislocated right arm and rushed out from the crowd, arriving in front of the Daoist priest's gun. Bang! At this time a gunshot sounded. This bullet hit Yang Si's body. The strong force pushed Yang Si away, causing him to fall on Yang Qindong, who was unconscious on the ground. It was this pounce that awakened Yang Qindong, who had suddenly received a blow. The moment he opened his eyes, he saw a few strong men slashing at Yang Si's back. After a few slashes, blood was dripping and red blood covered the ground. Yang Si. Yang Qindong, who was awake, immediately shouted in his heart. Then he suddenly jumped up from the ground. While holding Yang Si in his arms, he took out a desert eagle and fired at the assassins in front of him. Bang bang bang. Every time a shot was fired, blood would splatter. Under the powerful lethality of the desert eagle, 2 of the 3 people who were wielding the sword had their heads smashed, and their faces were unrecognizable. Another person was shot in the stomach, causing his intestines and blood to flow all over the ground. All of this happened in a very short period of time. At this time, the guards who were isolated from the crowd also reacted. With Captain Qiu Vi as the leader, Ba Daojiang on the left and Ping Yu on the right, The three members formed a 3-3 formation. They held the Type 95 in their hands and activated the burst mode. Anyone who dared to block in front of them, no matter if it was an assassin or an ordinary person who was watching the show, would become their enemy. Da-da-da. The gunshots were endless and one figure after another fell to the ground. Even the Daoist in the Daoist robe did not manage to escape. He was shot in the head by the angry Ba Daojiang, and fell to the ground with blood all over his body. Sixth young master. Qiu Vi and the other two formed the first echelon and came to Yang Qindong's side. The other guards were also rushing over. What are you looking at? Who has hemostatic medicine on them? Take it out. Yang Qindong shouted crazily. At this time his body was covered in blood, all of which flowed out from Yang Xi's body. In order to protect himself, this person forcefully dislocated his arm, took a shot and was even slashed several times. He was already on the verge of death. Chapter 8:12. I have it. Ba Daojiang reached into his chest and took out a small white porcelain bottle. People like him who had been in the Jianghu for a long time naturally carried hemostatic medicine with them. He reached out and took it, then quickly laid Yang Xi's body flat. First he used a little force to reattach the dislocated arm. Then he tore apart Yang Xi's clothes, revealing a layer of bulletproof vest inside. When it was taken off, a bloody red back was revealed. When the porcelain bottle was opened, the powder sprinkled on the back like rain, immediately causing Yang Xi's body to twitch. It was obvious that the effect of the medicine was good. It had the effect of reducing inflammation and stopping bleeding. Yang Xi's body also reacted. It was a good thing that there was a reaction. At least it meant that Yang Xi's body was still breathing. Yang Qindong was immediately overjoyed. He shouted loudly, Yang Xi, you have to hold on. Hold on. With the young master here you will be fine. Men, quickly bring the carriage here. Just as Yang Qindong was about to save Yang Xi, a large number of Baiming soldiers suddenly appeared on the street. As soon as they appeared, the originally bustling street instantly became empty. The black cavalry guards also widened their eyes and stared at the newcomers. Many of them even took out the 95 style. Previously, it was because they were careless and did not fulfill their duties that the sixth young master was in danger. Now that they were prepared, how could they let the previous incident happen again? Under the black muzzles of the guns, the Baiming soldiers who came from afar trembled. The leader, who was wearing a general's uniform, was sweating profusely. He led his men forward and shouted, Everyone, don't be nervous. I am Dong Bao, the general of the Yongding Gate. What happened here? Actually, there was no need to ask. Looking at the formation in front of him, especially the black knights with obvious markings, Dong Bao knew that the Duke of Loyalty was in danger. It was only because this place was the closest to the Yongding Gate that he had to come and take a look. Otherwise he was afraid that if his superiors blamed him he would have to bear the consequences. The person reported his name with a careful and cautious expression. The Black Knights noticed this and their gazes landed on Captain Qiu Vi. Qiu Vi naturally couldn't make the decision on such an important matter. He glanced at Yang Qindong cautiously and asked, Sixth young master, the general guarding the Yongding Gate is here. What do you think? Call him over. He was worried about Yang Xi's injury and thought that it would be best to find a quiet place immediately and find a doctor to treat him. So at this time he couldn't think of anything else. Hearing Yang Qindong's order, Qiu Vi immediately responded. Then he said to Dong Bao, who was still trembling with fear, General Dong, come over. Yes. Dong Bao answered like a lackey and trotted forward with his head lowered. However, the moment he lowered his head, his previous panic disappeared and was replaced by a look of determination. Because his head was lowered, no one noticed his change at all. Dong Bao trotted toward Yang Qindong. When he was 5 meters away, Qiu Vi suddenly shouted, Okay, just stand there. With the previous lesson he would never allow an unknown person to be so close to the sixth young master. With this shout, Dong Bao's body involuntarily slowed down. However, his body did not stop obediently. Instead he continued to move forward. As he walked he said, We are so far away. How can I listen to the Duke of Loyalty's admonition? If I tell you to stop, then stop. If you continue to move forward, I will shoot. Seeing that Dong Bao was already 4 meters away, but he still didn't stop, Ba Daojiang's eyes flashed with anger and he shouted loudly. With this shout, the meaning of reminder and warning was very obvious. Even Yang Qindong, who had been lowering his head to check on Xi's injuries, couldn't help but raise his head. When he raised his head, he suddenly shouted, "Not good, everyone spread out." As he spoke, Yang Qindong was the first to retreat with Xianxia in his arms. With a leap, he covered a distance of 2 to 3 meters. Qiu Vi, Ba Daojiang and Ping Yu, who were the closest, had long been used to following Yang Qindong's orders. This shout was equivalent to an order, and they quickly retreated into the distance. With this shout, Dong Bao's body suddenly emitted green smoke. That was the appearance of gunpowder after it was ignited. Then, with a face full of laughter, Dong Bao immediately followed in the direction Yang Qindong ran in. Bang! He fired a shot, completely relying on his intuition. He even skipped the process of aiming. With this shot, Dong Bao, who was moving forward, fell to his knees with a thud. It was also at this moment that he realized in horror that his right knee had been smashed, and he could no longer maintain the posture of moving forward. The sound of the gunshot shocked everyone. However, with an even louder explosion, the gunpowder in Dong Bao's body exploded. In an instant, everything within 3 meters of Dong Bao was turned into nothingness. The place where he was previously standing was also turned into a deep pit, indicating the powerful power of the gunpowder. They killed General Dong. This is clearly a rebellion. Brothers, let's kill them together. Just after this explosion, a voice suddenly came from the crowd of Baiming army. Then a gunshot rang out and a black knight on a horse fell to the ground. Looking carefully, that gunshot was fired by the Baiming army. This time Chao Xan got a total of 3 guns. 2 of them were on the Daoist priest, and the other one was hidden in the Baiming army as a backup. With this gunshot, a black knight fell from his horse. The situation that was originally under control became chaotic again. More and more Baiming soldiers began to attack the Black Knights and Yang Qindong. It was obvious that they wanted to use their advantage in numbers to completely engulf them. Although Dong Bao was dead, the number of soldiers he brought with him was not small. From a distance there were at least 500 or 600 people. Moreover, this did not exclude the possibility that there might be assassins in the dark and more soldiers gathering to attack. On the other hand, Yang Qindong only had about 50 people from the first guard squad. This was more than 10 times the number of soldiers they had. As the captain, Qiu Vi suddenly felt a lot of pressure. At this time the carriage was already in front of Yang Qindong. Because he dodged quickly, Dong Bao's human bomb didn't hit him. However, the power of the aftershock was still not small. It hit his back, and at this time the green clothes he was wearing were already tattered. Fortunately, it was winter, so he wore a lot of thick clothes. Even so, the bulletproof vest still revealed some of his true colors. Fire the signal flare. Before the reinforcements arrive, no one is allowed to get close to the carriage. This is an absolute order. With both hands holding the unconscious and bleeding Xianxia, Yang Qindong gave the absolute order to Qiu Vi with a cold face. "Sixth young master, don't worry. Unless all the soldiers are sacrificed, no one is allowed to get close to the carriage." Qiu Vi saluted with a serious expression. After watching Yang Qindong enter the carriage, he turned around and took out a signal flare from his waist. As a person who followed the 6th young master, he naturally carried a signal flare with him at all times. But there weren't many situations where he could actually use it. Every time he used it, it meant that the situation was critical and dangerous. Bang! With a loud sound, a powerful red signal flare rose into the air. Although it was still daytime, the signal flare was still very eye-catching to ensure that it would attract people's attention. After the signal flare was fired, Qiu Vi stood in front of the carriage and looked at the first guard squad members who were looking at him because of the signal flare. He said in a loud voice, "The 6th young master ordered that no one is allowed to get close to the carriage. The rest is up to my comrades." "Yes." Everyone shouted in unison from the bottom of their hearts. After the 49 guard squad members responded, they quickly began to retreat. While they were retreating, the 95 style in their hands spewed out flames and shot fatal bullets at the enemies charging at them. Just as Qiu Vi was worried, the enemy wasn't just the 500 or 600 people in front of them. As the gunshots rang out, the Baiming soldiers who were charging at the front fell to the ground one by one. Many men dressed in black appeared from the sides and behind them. They held bows and crossbows in their hands and quickly approached them while continuously shooting arrows. They looked like they were going to eat the first guard squad members alive. After more than 200 Biming soldiers were killed, they learned to be smart. They didn't charge blindly. Instead, they took advantage of the complicated terrain on the street and began to look for a place to hide. Once they were safe, they would immediately pick up the bows on their backs and launch a long-range counterattack. It was true that they were not a match for the continuous fire guns, but they did not believe that these dozens of people would be able to carry much ammunition. Even if they had to exhaust the mercenaries, they had to exhaust them. The signal flare for help had been sent out, but it would take some time for them to appear. How to control the situation during this time, prevent the enemy from approaching the carriage, and complete the task given by the sixth young master became the most important problem. Just as the dead man thought when they went out this time, because there was no plan at all, each soldier didn't bring a lot of bullets. In addition to the magazine in the gun, each soldier only brought 2 more. They thought that after a fierce attack the enemies would be afraid and retreat. But the enemies in front of them were very tenacious. They looked like they didn't care about their lives. Coupled with the complicated terrain, the power of the 95 style was greatly restrained. Just like the previous wave of attacks, each soldier used up a magazine. If they continued like before, at most 2 more waves of attacks they would run out of ammunition. Chapter 8:13. Everyone listen up. Switch from continuous fire to burst fire. Don't think about killing too many enemies. Focus on suppressing them and wait for reinforcements. Qiu Vi made the most accurate judgment on the battlefield after a simple analysis. Following his orders, the guards reduced the number of shots they fired. They would only fire back when the enemy's figure was completely revealed or when they were about to charge forward and threaten them. This was perhaps the biggest drawback of firearms. Unlike swords, knives, spears, swords and staffs which could be used repeatedly without logistical support, the number of bullets would decrease. The mercenaries changed their strategy and focused on stability. As the enemy, the northern Ming soldiers became even more arrogant. Seeing that there were no more bullets flying, they immediately shouted, "The enemy's muskets have run out of gunpowder. Next it's our turn to attack. Brothers, let's charge. Kill the Duke of Loyalty and everyone will be rewarded with 500 taels of silver and be promoted by 3 ranks." The effect of the shout was obvious. The northern Ming soldiers who were originally under the threat of the 9-5 and had already found a place to hide were all enraged when they heard such a reward. Then they revealed their heads from the shadows. Then while shooting arrows they rushed onto the main street and launched a second attack on the guards. At the sides and back of the carriage, there were at least 40 black-clothed men moving about. They were using even more advanced crossbows and arrows. Within a distance of less than 100 meters, the threat of such weapons was extremely great. In just a short while 7 or 8 guards had been hit by the arrows. If they weren't wearing bulletproof vests, they would have become cold corpses by now. There was a large army attacking from the front, and there were people causing trouble from the sides and the rear. The first guard squad fell into a bitter battle that they had never used before. As the captain, Qiu Vi had already finished the 9-5 and was using a pistol. Even the pistol's 2 spare magazines were used up. Now there were less than 3 bullets left in the pistol. The security team members guarding the front also fired a burst of bullets, forcibly suppressing the enemy's second attack. Then everyone's face was solemn as they reloaded their last spare magazine. They knew that this would be their last hope. The enemies in front of him were suppressed, and the men in black behind him threw down more than 20 corpses. However, the death rate didn't scare them away. These people were like members of a suicide squad. They didn't even look at the death of their companions. Their eyes were fixed on the carriage in front of them. Their target hadn't died yet, which meant that their mission hadn't been completed yet. They still had to continue on their journey. Qiu Vi fired the last few bullets from his pistol. However, the enemy was moving at high speed. He only managed to injure 1 person. Qiu Vi then holstered his pistol and pulled out the 3 bayonets from his waist. He shouted, "Soldiers on both sides, follow me. No matter what, we cannot let them get close to the carriage." Without firearms, Qiu Vi and the others would have to complete the mission given to them by the 6th young master even if they had to use cold weapons. This was their mission and responsibility. Even if there was only 1 person left, no one would take a step back. Charge! Ba Daojiang, Ping Yu and the others responded enthusiastically. They also pulled out their bayonets and rushed towards the men in black. After that, there was a series of clanging sounds as the 2 sides fought each other, and the fight became a mess. Close combat was far crueler than using firearms to kill people. Often, even if they were beaten until they were covered in blood and had lost their arms, they could still pose a threat to their opponents with their steel teeth. In such a battle, it was basically impossible to escape unscathed. Even though the individual qualities of the guards were very strong in a battle of life and death, it was still inevitable that they would be injured or even killed in battle. After only a few exchanges, half of the remaining 20 or so black-clothed men fell, and 2 of the guards were killed and 3 were injured. These men in black were the type that knew martial arts. In terms of individual combat strength, they were far superior to ordinary Biming soldiers. Even the embroidered uniform guards who boasted extraordinary combat strength could not reach their level. Moreover, the arrows in these men's hands were highly toxic. Once shot, it would not take long for them to foam at the mouth and suffocate to death. If the soldiers did not wear black armor outside and bulletproof vests inside, the number of casualties would be much higher than the men in black. Even so, Qiu and the others did not intend to take half a step back. They were sad that their comrades had died, but they would not cry. They wanted to turn their sadness into motivation to kill more enemies and avenge their comrades. The rear was already engaged in a battle, and the guards were beginning to suffer casualties. The enemies in the front also tried to launch 2 small attacks. Perhaps it was because too many people had died before, so they were also afraid. But even if they were cautious enough to launch an attack, they still consumed a lot of the guards' bullets. Seeing that another big attack was coming, the 2 sides would inevitably have to fight with cold weapons. The situation was already very critical at this point. In the carriage, Xianxia had already been laid down flat. Fortunately, the space was big enough for Yang Chendong to use. Yang Chendong no longer cared about everything outside the carriage. Since he had handed the mission to Qiu, he had to completely trust him. Right now, he had another mission to do, and that was to save Xianxia. Although Xianxia's identity was only a servant of the Yang family, whether in the eyes of Yang Chendong or in the eyes of outsiders, it was not like this. They seemed to have become his family, his closest relatives. How could Yang Chendong watch his closest relatives die in front of him and not care? Not to mention, Xianxia's injuries were caused by protecting himself, so there was no reason for him to not care. Speaking of which, Xianxia's body did not have any fatal injuries. Most of them were caused by external injuries. The only fatal injury was excessive blood loss. In the eyes of outsiders, this kind of excessive blood loss was naturally beyond their ability. However, for Yang Chendong, who had experienced hundreds of battles, suffered countless injuries and completed countless life and death missions, it was not without a bit of hope. In the carriage, Yang Chendong first roughly checked Xianxia's injuries. After knowing that he fainted because of excessive blood loss, he disappeared from the spot. When he reappeared, there were a few disposable infusion tubes and needles in his hands. Let's go all out. Although I haven't checked, I don't think there will be any changes to his blood type. He sighed to himself. In his past life, he was a type O all-purpose blood type. He had given blood to and received blood from his comrades more than once. Even without anyone's help, he could still do this job very well. As if he had done it many times before, Yang Chendong stabbed the needle into his arm. Outside the carriage, the battle was still ongoing. It had already been at a stalemate for more than an hour. The casualties on both sides were constantly increasing. 300 meters away, atop the high walls of a residence, Cao Qin was watching this scene with a fierce expression. Today's events were all part of his plan. By chance, his subordinates saw the imperial censor of the right enter the immortal abode and hurriedly reported it to him. Then, the massive battle plan was put into motion. First, the poison experts of the embroidered uniform guard entered the immortal abode, as if they were looking for someone, and sprinkled laxatives into Dong Chuanhua's food. Then they waited for Yang Chendong to appear. As expected, this matter involved a major second-rank official. As expected, Yang Chendong had come to the capital. However, Cao Qin wasn't satisfied with the 50 or so guards at his side. But that didn't matter. The military strength he had arranged was several times that of the enemies. Coupled with the sudden attack, they had at least a 70% chance of victory. The Daoist priest selling immortal pills was just a cover. Even Cao Qin himself wasn't sure if it would pique Yang Chendong's curiosity. If it didn't work, then they could only wait for the Duke of Loyalty to arrive at the Yongding Gate. The heavens seemed to be very fond of him. Yang Chendong really stopped, and this made Zhou Xian extremely excited. He seemed to have already seen the scene of Yang Qindong's death. He saw the scene of Yang Qindong's death leading to a fight between the mercenaries and the northern Ming dynasty, and the southern Ming dynasty reaping the benefits. But another accident disrupted Zhao Qin's plans. Those black-clad guards were actually so difficult to deal with. Again and again, even after using the 3 guns he'd spent so much effort to obtain, they still couldn't kill Yang Qindong. This made him feel like he'd punched an iron pot. He knew that he wouldn't have another chance. Helpless, Zhao Qin gave the order to attack with all his might. He sent out all the experts he'd brought with him from Baiming, looking like he was willing to sacrifice everyone to complete this mission. As the battle continued, the situation seemed to become more and more unfavorable for him. Zhao Qin's heart became heavier and heavier when he saw the mercenaries in black armor, making him feel helpless. Most of the casualties were his own warriors. "Sir, look over there. Is that Baiming's army?" At this moment, a subordinate's voice sounded in his ear, attracting Zhao Qin's attention. After an hour, the Baiming army in the city finally made a move. A large number of soldiers rushed over. Speaking of which, Baiming's army shouldn't take so long to react to something like this. In fact, less than half an hour after the incident happened, the higher-ups in the Baiming army knew about it. But when they found out that the Duke of Loyalty was involved, they didn't immediately send out the order to send troops. Instead, they sent someone to report the news to the palace. Unexpectedly, they didn't receive the order immediately. It turned out that the acting sect master Zhu Xian was hesitating. Chapter 8:14. He was certain that he had not given the order to kill Yang Qindong. The head eunuch beside him, Jin Ying, who was also the supervisor of the embroidered uniform guard, was also negotiating in the Yang manner. It was impossible for her to make a move against Yang Qindong. If that was the case, then this time it was not one of his own people who made a move. Since it was not one of his own people who made a move, what did it have to do with him? He would just let them make a fuss. If they really did kill Yang Qindong, it would not be his fault. He would also be able to get rid of a big problem in his heart. Wasn't that a good thing? Zhu Qiu was only thinking about who would dare to kill Yang Qindong in the capital and make such a big fuss about it. It was at this time that the supervisor eunuch of the Imperial Horse Directorate, Qin Guan, asked for an audience. As soon as he saw the emperor, he knelt on the ground and shouted that the imperial city was in trouble and that he had come to protect the emperor. Qin Guan's sudden action was seen by Zhu Qiu and was naturally puzzled. He did not understand why there was trouble out of the blue. With an unhappy expression, he asked, "Qin Guan, why are you so panicked? Your Majesty, don't you know that danger is descending?" Qin Guan raised his head and pretended to be very confused. "Speak." Zhu Qiu did not like officials who played riddles with him. He was the emperor and did not need to spend any effort on this kind of thing. Seeing that Zhu Qiu was a little angry, Qin Guan didn't dare to play any more tricks. He immediately changed his appearance and said very sincerely, "Your Majesty, although the Duke of Zhongdan's death wasn't caused by us, if he died in the capital, Baiming wouldn't be able to escape responsibility. Those who do not understand will only think that the Duke of Loyalty and Courage died at our hands. How many people will ask for the truth? If that happens, the consequences will be unthinkable." Zhu Qiu, who was originally standing there with his hands behind his back, moved slightly. His mouth opened and closed. He seemed to want to say something, but in the end he gave up. He knew that Qin Guan was right. If the Duke of Loyalty really died in his territory, ignoring everything else, just the fact that he did not save him would cause northern Ming to suffer. Under his guidance, Baiming's army was growing stronger by the day, but this was not the reason why he wanted to fight to the death with the mercenaries. At least for now, the mercenaries were not his enemy. He wanted to first unify the Great Ming and resolve the internal problems before he could turn around and deal with others. This was the need to first settle the internal problems. Zhu Qiu was thinking, so he did not immediately make a decision. Qin Guan, who was kneeling on the ground, was already drenched in cold sweat from the shock. In the palace there were constant infighting, both open and covert. Choosing a side was of the utmost importance. Qin Guan had chosen Jin Ying as his master. The eunuch group was so big that Jin Ying alone could not make the decision. Below him was the powerful Gao Rang. This person was the supervisor eunuch of the Imperial Horse Directorate and the director of the East Depot. He was someone who could wrestle with Jin Ying. If Jin Ying died in Yangzhou village, it could be imagined that an internal cleansing would be inevitable. As Jin Ying's assistant in the Imperial Horse Directorate, Gao Rang's fate could be imagined. He had no choice but to stand out. This time he owed a favor to Dai Zong. Not only was he saving Jin Ying, he was also saving himself. He had no choice but to come. After a long time under Qin Guan's expectant gaze, Zhu Qiu finally opened his mouth. Issue an edict. Zhang Rang is to bring people to the rescue and protect the Duke of Loyalty and Courage's life. Qin Guan's expectant face could not help but reveal a trace of disappointment. However, he knew that this was the Emperor's greatest concession. He immediately kowtowed and said, "This official obeys." After Qin Guan left, Zhu Qiu finally turned his head and looked up at the roof of a large hall. He muttered, "I have done what I should. Everything will be up to the will of the heavens." The so-called will of the heavens was a trace of unwillingness in Zhu Qiu's heart. He did not want to miss the opportunity to kill Yang Qindong, but he also did not want to be too obvious. Thus he handed the matter over to Zhang Rang. He believed that Zhang Rang should understand his intentions. If he had been a step late, perhaps a great danger could have been eliminated. From this, it could be seen that the Emperor was wise. He was well aware of the internal strife within the eunuch group. Perhaps this was what he wanted to see, or perhaps he had caused it. After receiving the imperial edict, Gao Rang began to gather the members of the Eastern Faction Guards. Then he unhurriedly headed in the direction of the Yongding Gate. At the same time he also sent people to closely observe the movements in the direction of the Yang Manor so that he could make the best judgment. He watched the battle in the distance. When he saw the black-clothed assassin and the black-clad warrior fighting to the death, and when both sides were injured, Gao Rang's expression did not change. It was as if what was happening in front of him was not a life-and-death duel, but just a child's game. Since the Emperor had given this task to him, he naturally understood the meaning behind it. What he needed to do was to wait and see. Unless it was absolutely necessary, he would not casually make a move. Not only that, but he also led the eunuchs of the Eastern Faction Guards to block the other Baiming soldiers who had rushed here. Not only would he not casually make a move, but he would also not allow others to make a move. However, when news came from the south, Gao Rang's brows furrowed slightly. He knew that things were still out of his expectations. There was finally movement in the direction of the Yang Manor. The spies from the Eastern faction said that they saw cavalry rushing over. "Duke of Loyalty and Courage, your luck is not bad." Seemingly sighing softly, Gao Rang turned around and gave the order to dispatch the troops. On the battlefield, Qiu Vi, whose body was half covered in blood, stabbed the military knife in his hand into the chest of another black-clothed man. In exchange, blood spurted out and dyed his black armor red again. However, he did not seem to have heard it. He even frowned. His left hand unconsciously reached deep behind his waist where the signal gun was. He was already considering whether to fire a blue signal flare. A red signal flare meant that there was a crisis and it was somewhat urgent. However, if a blue signal flare was fired, it would mean a great crisis. Seeing this, no matter what mission one was in charge of, one had to immediately come to the scene and carry out a rescue mission. From what Qiu Vi knew, there were many mercenary brothers in the capital. For example, there was at least a platoon of Cold Vanguard guarding the Yang family bank. Moreover, they had sufficient ammunition all year round. Once they appeared here, they would become a powerful force. There were also the spies of the security bureau in the city. They were not few in number and their skills were probably not ordinary. They were also a military force that could not be underestimated. Just now Qiu Vi had such thoughts. He had also looked in the direction of the carriage more than once. However, from start to finish, the sixth young master's figure had never appeared. Without orders, he did not dare to approach and ask for instructions. However, it seemed that the situation had reached the most critical moment. If he did not ask for reinforcements now, he would not have the chance to ask for reinforcements. His eyes were filled with hesitation and struggle, but in the end, for the sake of the sixth young master's safety, Chou Wu made up his mind to fire the bomb for help. But at this moment, a large group of East Faction depot eunuchs charged out of the inner city of the capital. They were all nimble and robust, and the moment they appeared, they rushed over from all directions like locusts. Just as the East Faction depot eunuchs appeared, a group of black-clothed cavalry rushed out from the Yongding Gate. Although there were not many of them, they were exceptionally brave. Each one of them rode on horseback and waved their sharp sabers. They rushed behind the Biming soldiers. Every time they swung their sabers down, a Biming soldier's head would fly into the air. It's the second guard squad. Comrades, kill them. Although they were still far away, Chiovi could clearly see that they were his brothers from the second guard squad. His face immediately lit up with joy. While he raised the morale of his comrades with a shout, he also felt as if his body was filled with endless strength. He rushed to kill the nearest black-clothed man. Beta Persei had arrived. Xianxia had arrived. Dao Xiao had also arrived. Behind them, Commander Xiao Feng had also arrived with the main force of the Cold Front. Only the Wolf Fang Special Forces and the Ghost Shadow Sniper team were left in the Yang family village. This time all of them had come out because they had seen the red signal flare. As the only cavalry team, Beta Persei personally went into battle. He immediately ended the negotiations, took control of Jining and rode over. However, he still encountered 4 sniper attacks along the way. After he consecutively threw the heads of more than a dozen enemies into the air, he finally broke through the obstacles, rushed into the Yongding Gate and rushed behind the enemy. It was precisely because he knew that Beta Persei and the others had arrived that Gao Rang stopped watching and chose to take the initiative to attack. The 2 reinforcements appeared from the north and the south. The ones who suffered were the southern Ming men of sacrifice who were still desperately trying to get close to the target carriage. Originally, everything was under control and the plan was proceeding very smoothly. In fact, they had enough time for 2 hours. However, who would have thought that these Black Knights were really too difficult to deal with? After they had used up all the ammunition in their hands, they chose to fight in close combat. Then they used a very strange tactic to forcibly block the southern Ming men beside the carriage. This made the carriage seem very close, but in fact it was very far away. If they had originally wanted to use their last bit of strength to try and complete the mission, with the appearance of the Black Knights and Biming finally making a move, their mission was destined to be impossible. Chao Exin, who was hiding on the high wall of a house, shook his head with a look of disappointment. Let's go. We'll leave through the secret passage immediately. He knew that if he did not leave now, he would not have the chance to leave again. With the arrival of Beta Persei and the other Black Knights, the enemy's morale was depleted. They only resisted for less than a quarter of an hour before they were all killed. At this moment, Gao Rang and a group of Eastern Faction Guards eunuchs appeared 100 meters north of the carriage. Chiovi held his sword and faced them. Although he felt a sense of exhaustion, he still had no intention of retreating. He only stared at Gao Rang and the others in front of him to ensure that if the other party wanted to attack, he would become a mountain and block the enemy's attack. Alert, everyone alert. Show your weapons. Fair, any blind people, just shoot and kill. If you kill someone, it's on me. Beta Persei jumped down from his warhorse as he spoke to Xianxia, Dao Xiao and the others behind him. Chapter 8:15. Although they left in a hurry, they still brought a lot of ammunition with them. When the second guard squad delivered the bullets to the first squad, the faces of the guards of the 2 squads were brimming with confidence again. It was as if with guns in hand they had the power to rule the world. On the opposite side of Gao Rang, rows upon rows of rifles were ready to fire. There were even 3 machine guns of the 9th and 5th squad that were quickly set up, forming a perfect blockade. In this tense atmosphere, looking at the steel sword in his hand, Gao Rang wisely made the decision to stop moving forward. Beside the carriage, Beta Persei knelt on the ground and shouted with his unique loud voice, "Young master, Beta Persei is late, please forgive me. Don't say any more, let's go back to Yongjia village." A slightly weak voice sounded. Yang Qindong, who had just drawn 400 cubic centimeters of blood, was a little weak, so when he said this sentence he gave people a sense of lack of confidence. Yang Qindong's answer was a little weak, which shocked Beta Persei, who had been following him. He wanted to open the carriage door to take a look, but he did not dare to do so without an order. He could only agree, then stood up and shouted, "Young master has ordered the entire army to retreat to Yongjia village." The carriage was driven by Xianxia himself. The head of the security bureau was a little pale. Such a big assassination operation, but there was no warning beforehand. This was his dereliction of duty. Now driving the carriage was just an expression of guilt. East Factory Manager Gao Rang has come to protect the Duke of Loyalty under the orders of the Daizong. Please see him. At this moment, Gao Rang's shout came with the wind. He knew that Yang Qindong would not believe anyone at this time, but he still had to shout out his attitude. Otherwise, Baiming would not be able to get away from this assassination. No one answered Gao Rang's words, only the cold wind continued to blow, and the enemy's corpses were scattered all over the ground. In this battle, 9 members of the 1st Guard Squad died and 18 were injured. The corpses of their dead comrades were naturally carried away, leaving behind the corpses of the southern Ming men of sacrifice. Although they were still far away, the smell of blood could still be smelled. It was as if to say how crazy and cruel the battle just now was. Yongsan, steady yourself. As soon as the carriage exited the Yongding gate, Yang Qindong, who was driving the carriage, heard Yang Qindong's voice. He had no choice but to slow down. Fortunately, they were already out of the capital and Xiao Feng and his cold-edged soldiers could be seen on the sides of the road. The danger had passed and they were finally safe. After about an hour of steady travel, the luxurious carriage finally entered the Yang clan manor. At the entrance of the manor, 2nd Madam Qiao Yin, 4th Madam Lady Xiang, 7th Sister Yang duo, and everyone from the Yang Family Academy had already come out to welcome them. They only saw the red signal flare rise into the sky, but they didn't know what exactly happened. The carriage is here. From afar, many people heaved a sigh of relief when they saw the iconic carriage appear under the protection of the Black Knights. Since the carriage was fine, the 6th young master was probably fine as well. But there were also some sharp-eyed people who saw the 9 corpses on the horses, and their expressions turned grave. Who were these Black Knights? They were definitely the strongest force of the mercenaries, or else they wouldn't have been assigned to the 6th young master's side. But even they had lost so many people, so one could easily imagine how intense the battle had been. Yang San drove the carriage to a stop in front of the 2 madams, but before the 2 madams could say anything, Yang Qindong's voice came from within the carriage. Go to the Academy's infirmary. Yang San agreed and smiled apologetically at the 2 madams. Then the carriage drove away. Unlike before, it wasn't just the Black Knights following them, but also a few other women. The carriage finally stopped in front of the Academy's infirmary. Yang San took the initiative to open the carriage door, revealing a very pale Yang Qindong. Yang San's eyes were filled with tears when he saw the wise and mighty 6th young master become like this, and even his green robe was already in tatters. Young master, it's our fault. We didn't foresee this in advance. Well, this matter has nothing to do with you. Yang Qindong reached out and patted Yang San on the shoulder, then jumped off the carriage and said to Beta Persei, you 2 carry Yang Si down and remember to be careful. By the way, where is Yuan Heping? After Yang Qindong shouted, a man in his 30s among the academy students immediately responded, Dean Heping is here. Come here. Seeing Yuan Heping, a smile finally appeared on Yang Qindong's face. This person came from a medical family. Although he was young, he was already quite famous in the middle-aged field. Later he came to the Yang Qindong Academy and was chosen by the 2nd Dean Wang Si. He stayed there to learn Western medicine and made rapid progress. He was the person with the best medical results among Yang Qindong's forces. Heping, you also get on the carriage. Yang Si is receiving an infusion. You hold the bottle and be careful. Yang Qindong called Yuan Heping over, patted him on the shoulder and then walked in the direction of the 2 madams. With Yuan Heping's help, Yang Si was lifted out of the carriage. His body was covered in blood, and as soon as his pale and colorless face appeared, it caused a series of gasps. In the crowd, 4th Madam's personal maid, Xiao Wei, exclaimed and was about to run forward, but she was stopped by Yang Qindong, who was already prepared. Don't be so agitated. Your husband can be saved, but if you go up and cause trouble, then it's not certain. Xiao Wei was Yang Si's wife. Her marriage was personally arranged by Yang Qindong. As a wife, how could she not be moved by her husband's current state? Right now she just wanted to lie on Yang Si's body and cry. However, since these words were said by the 6th young master, Xiao Wei naturally didn't dare to disobey. She could only retreat to the side with tears in her eyes. Yang Qindong signaled to 4th Madam with his eyes, asking her to take care of Xiao Wei. Then he looked at Qiao Yin and 7th Sister Yang duo and said, do you have clean clothes? I'm too dirty right now. I don't even have a shape. Scope. Xiao Yin and Yang Duo took a step forward at the same time. One in each hand, pulled Yang Qindong into the inner courtyard of the Yang Manor. Along the way there was a burst of crying. Fortunately, they learned that Yang Qindong wasn't seriously injured. Only then did they relax a lot. Young master, can Xianxia be saved? Xiao Yin's worry shifted to the heavily injured Xianxia. When Yang Qindong wasn't here, this person had always stayed in the manor to protect them. After interacting with him for a long time, they naturally had feelings for each other. Just like how Hu Yan called Yang Qindong Dong Shui in private, Xiao Yin was also used to calling him young master in private. Yang Qindong corrected her a few times, but found that it was useless. Hearing Xiao Yin's question, he nodded confidently. He can definitely be saved. After washing up, Yang Qindong went from the inner courtyard to the academy's infirmary. Although it was called an infirmary, it was actually a small hospital. It covered an area of several thousand square meters and had more than 10 beds. There was also a special room for receiving patients. When Yang Qindong appeared, he was quickly surrounded by people. The most excited of them all was Yuan Heping. Dean, brother Xianxia is receiving an infusion. Is it the blood you usually talk about in class? That's right. It's blood. Yang Qindong nodded. He looked at Yuan Heping and asked, have you checked if there are any life-threatening injuries on his body? I've checked. There aren't any life-threatening injuries. Some wounds have already stopped bleeding after applying medicine. They're in good condition. Next, he just needs to replenish enough blood. There shouldn't be any major problems, Yuan Heping said confidently. He had never thought about infusions, especially blood transfusions, to save people. He admitted that he wasn't as good as the dean in these matters. However, when it came to treating people with Chinese medicine, he was confident that there weren't many people who were better than him. Yang Qindong was still very confident in Yuan Heping's Chinese medicine skills. He immediately nodded. Okay, as long as there are no other life-threatening injuries. Then I'll teach you how to test blood types from now on. Remember, only people with the same blood type can transfuse with each other and not be rejected. You must remember this point clearly. Go and gather the other students who are interested in learning medicine. While asking Yuan Heping to gather the people, Yang Qindong waved his hand. His servant Yang Lu came to Yang Qindong with a ritual instrument. This was the blood test instrument, a big warehouse item. This time Yang Qindong wanted to take the opportunity to teach everyone new knowledge. What happened today also reminded Yang Qindong that it was necessary to establish personal health records for the people close to him and the higher-ups in the military. For example, the history of genetic diseases, some things that required taboos, and blood types all needed to be recorded. Otherwise, if there was a problem and he wasn't there, wouldn't there be a real problem? With the blood test, Yang Qindong started to operate it in front of Yuan Heping and the other students. After a few times, he saw that Yuan Heping was doing it himself and there was nothing wrong with the blood test, so he handed the job over. Xianxia has type B blood. Let's see who has type B blood. If you are healthy and are willing to donate blood, please prepare more. If it's not enough, use the all-purpose O. Do you understand? Also, when a person's body has been in it for a long time, there will always be some blood in it. The quality of this blood is not good. Some blood should be discharged within a certain period of time. It doesn't matter if it's not more than 200 milliliters at a time. On the contrary, it will be beneficial to the human body's metabolism. You must make this clear to everyone. Blood donation can't be forced. For example, I donated 400 milliliters at a time. I can't force it. Yang Qindong had to make these things clear. Otherwise, everyone would misunderstand the blood donation and think that it would harm their bodies. If that was the case, then there would be problems. He had set himself as an example by donating 400 milliliters first. This was a clear example. It should dispel some people's misgivings. Chapter 8:16. Dean, I understand. His face was filled with excitement and emotion. Whether it was the blood test or the blood transfusion to save people, it was like a new window had been opened, allowing Yuan Heping to see a new world. He could even assert that once the blood transfusion to save people worked, who knew how many people would benefit and how many people would be saved from the brink of death. Of course, all of these procedures had to be up to standard. Only when there were no problems would it be considered saving people. Otherwise, it would be harming people. In the ward, Xianxia was lying peacefully. After the fresh blood entered his body, his condition was much better than before. At least there was more color on his face. This made Xiaowei, who had been accompanying him, extremely excited. When she saw that it was the sixth young master who had entered the ward, she hurriedly stood up in a panic and wanted to kneel on the ground to thank him. Yang Qindong was quick to react. He blocked the kneeling knee and shook his head gently. "Don't thank me. I should be thanking Yangxi. If it wasn't for him, I'm afraid I would be a dead man." "No, the sixth young master is invincible. Even God is afraid of you. He would never dare to accept you." Xiaowei was shocked when she heard Yang Qindong's words of gratitude. As a servant, shouldn't it be his duty to protect the master? How could he deserve a word of thanks? Yang Qindong did not explain anything. Instead, he carefully observed Yangxi's condition. When he found that everything had stabilized, he was relieved. After comforting him for a while, he left the ward. Outside, Beta Persei, Yang San, Yang Lu, Qiuvi, Daoshao, and the others were all looking at him as if they were looking at a god. They had all seen Yangxi's injuries, especially Qiuvi. As the first person besides Yang Qindong to see the injuries, his first thought was that brother Yangxi was definitely going to die. Although it was difficult for him to accept the news and he was very sad, there were always deaths when looking for a fight. To be able to die protecting the sixth young master was originally a very glorious thing. However, he never expected that he would be saved. Although he was still in a coma, didn't Yuan Heping say that he had lost a lot of blood? It was just excessive blood loss, nothing serious. It was only a matter of time before he woke up. A person who had been stabbed so many times that the bones in his back were exposed. His entire body had long been dyed red with blood. Even a person who was called by the King of Hell could be saved alive. At this moment, this only increased their respect for the sixth young master. If they followed such a person, what else did they have to worry about? What else did they have to worry about? Seeing a few pairs of eyes looking at him with admiration, Yang Qindong coughed softly. He took this opportunity to teach these tough men who killed without blinking on the battlefield a lesson. Do you see? This is the importance of knowledge. In the future, when you face doctors, teachers, and some scientific researchers, you have to be more polite. Sometimes bravery alone is useless. Brains and knowledge play an especially important role. Yes, we understand. Beta Persei and the others nodded in agreement. Yang Qindong was just taking this opportunity to improve the status of a cultured person. If a country wanted to develop, it was not enough to rely on strong military force. Cultivating both civil and military skills was the long-term way. Hey, Yangxi should be fine. You don't have to stay here. Go do whatever you need to do. Yes, young master. Jin Ying is still detained by us in the village. How do you want to deal with her? Beta Persei nodded repeatedly. Then he thought of the representatives of Baiming and became angry. At the beginning of the battle, Baiming could have saved her, but they did not. No matter how they dealt with Jin Ying now, it would not be too much. I'll take care of his matters myself. You just have to accompany me later. Of course, Yang Qindong was aware of what had happened at the scene. Although he had been in the carriage to save people, he was equally aware of what had happened outside. Beta Persei had just finished speaking when Yang San continued. Young master, our security bureau has not done well this time. I have already ordered the removal of the current director of the security bureau of Baiming from his position in the capital. He will be brought back to Xichen City for investigation. At the same time, I also sent someone to the scene to investigate and confirmed that the person behind the assassination was hiding in a house 300 meters away from the scene. It was only because he retreated quickly that he escaped first. Now our people have already caught up. Although we may not be able to catch the murderer, it is still possible to find out the true identity of the culprit based on these clues. This time, the Security Bureau had not received any news beforehand. It was true that they had not done their job well. But when he thought about it, wasn't he too careless? He had thought that Jin Ying would negotiate with him on behalf of Baiming so he could sit back and relax. He had lost the vigilance that he should have. Even when he entered the capital, he did not bring enough armed forces with him. In the end, 9 of his brothers were killed. He was also responsible for this. Even if he was responsible, Yang Qindong did not want to blame others. He did not want to do such a thing that was already lenient to others, so after listening to Yang San's report, he waved his hand. I won't ask what the Security Bureau wants to do this time. In short, we must find the real culprit. We can't let our 9 brothers die in vain. Yes, young master, don't worry. They won't be able to escape. Yang San was grateful that Yang Chendong did not reprimand him, but at the same time he made up his mind that he would not retreat until he found the real culprit. Even if the security bureau had to pay the price, he would accept it. Alright, you guys go do your own things. Qiuvi, Dao Xiao, you guys do your job well at the memorial service. I will attend it personally. Beta Persei, let's go. Yang Chendong reached out and patted Captain Qiuvi's shoulder, then turned and left. Qiuvi and Dao Xiao, who were left behind, were extremely excited. Although the 9 brothers who had died protecting the 6th young master, this was their duty. Compared to the soldiers from other divisions, regiments, and battalions who had to fight for military merits on the battlefield, their treatment was better and their conditions were better. With this, no one would regret their deaths. Instead, it was a kind of glory. Didn't the 6th young master say that he would attend the memorial service personally? This was giving face to his brothers. Based on this, if something similar were to happen in the future, how could he worry that his brothers would not do their best? Qiuvi and the others were still feeling emotional and moved when Yang Chendong, accompanied by Beta Persei, arrived at the negotiation room in the academy. When the door was pushed open, they saw Chief Eunuch Jin Ying and Commander Lu Gui of the Brocade Guard with bitter expressions on their faces. As soon as they saw Yang Chendong appear, they immediately stood up. Jin Ying's expression was even more careful, as if he wanted to smile but did not dare to. As the recorder and a woman, Junko did not ride out of the manor with Beta Persei and the others after knowing that a red signal had appeared in the capital. She did not have the qualifications to do so. The only thing she could do was to stay behind and watch the actions of Jin Ying and the others. In order to prevent these people from causing trouble, the captain of the Langia Special Forces, Tai Hu, personally took action. He set up an array in the room and released his aura that had killed countless people. Even Lu Gui did not dare to move, let alone the others. Not long after, Yang Chendong and the others returned to the manor. Junko also ran over to take a look. She saw the pale Yang Chendong and Yang Si, who had lost too much blood and was barely alive. Just when she thought that brother Yang Si was definitely dead, her classmates in the academy sent her news. He had been saved using a very advanced technology called blood transfusion. Food could be transported, weapons and armor could be transported, and when could even the blood of a person be transported? Filled with curiosity, she went to take a look and then saw a scene that shocked her. Bags of blood were really sent into Yang Si's body through plastic and transparent tubes. He was actually fine. This incident had a great impact on Junko's heart. She, who had been in the Yang family manor for 2 years, naturally knew a little about the strength of the mercenaries. But just the strength of the military was not surprising. Which dynasty didn't have the strongest army in the world in their hands? But what really caught Junko's attention was the knowledge taught in the Yang family's academy. This kind of teaching philosophy was completely different from Confucianism. It involved a wide range of knowledge, which was really an eye-opener for her. Perhaps this was the true reason why the mercenaries were so powerful. In 2 years, she believed that she had learned a lot of knowledge that she did not dare to think about before. But today's blood transfusion greatly stimulated her. Even a person who was bound to die could be saved. What else could the 6th young master not do? If one day the mercenaries really wanted to become enemies with Japan, what could they use to resist? What could they use to resist? Junko, who had complicated thoughts, focused her gaze on Yang Chendong the moment he pushed the door open. She could not move her gaze away for a long time. Yang Chendong, who was being looked at, did not care. Because the moment he pushed the door open, almost everyone in the room looked at him. Especially Jin Ying's gaze. There was respect, fear, and even a bit of flattery in her eyes. Yes, this popular person by Dai Zong's side was someone that even the ministers wanted to curry favor with. At this moment, when she looked at Yang Chendong, she showed a flattering expression. What happened had not been hidden from him. On the contrary, someone had specially reported it to him. It was because of this that Jin Ying very keenly discovered the problem. In this operation, although Baiming was not the main culprit, they could not shirk their responsibility. The assassins were probably not sent by Emperor Daizong. Otherwise, why would he waste his time negotiating with the mercenaries here? But it was true that they were not the ones who sent the assassins, but they did not take any action to save him. This was too wrong. Chapter 8:17. Jin Ying could even guess that the moment this incident occurred, The news must have reached the emperor as soon as possible. The emperor was probably already thinking about getting someone else to do his dirty work. But he also didn't think about it. If the Duke of Loyalty had really met with an accident in Baiming's capital, the mercenaries wouldn't just let it go. At that time, no one would listen to their explanation and a major battle would be unavoidable. Putting aside whether or not Baiming could win, at the very least, they would have lost the chance to destroy the southern Ming Empire and contend for hegemony over the world. Jin Ying did not believe that the emperor, who had always been wise and farsighted, would not be able to see such a simple logic. The reason he had not done so was probably because he was too afraid of the Duke of Loyalty and Courage and wanted him dead too much. Fortunately, at the last moment, Baiming had still sent out their troops. This action would at least win back some points and some trust. This was why Jin Ying was gratified but also why he was hesitant. Because this was only his own wishful thinking. He wasn't sure if Yang Qindong would think this way. If Yang Qindong blamed the assassination on him and killed him in a fit of rage, then given the current situation, even if the emperor was angry, there would be nothing he could do. This also meant that Jin Ying's life was in Yang Qindong's hands. How could Jin Ying not be afraid of this man who could decide his life and death with a single word? How could he not curry favor with him? Jin Ying smiled obsequiously. Lu Gui and the others lowered their heads, not daring to meet Yang Qindong's gaze. The atmosphere in the room suddenly quieted down. I am very angry. It was still Yang Qindong who spoke first. He found the chair at the head of the group and sat down. His gaze fell on Jin Ying and Lu Gui as he spoke. Yes, this Gong Gong can understand. Jin Ying also spoke up. Duke of Loyalty and Courage, I can guarantee that this matter is definitely not His Majesty's intention. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here to negotiate with you. As for Dong Chunhua who started the trouble, she will be severely punished. I can assure you of this. Jin Ying had taken the initiative to throw Dong Chunhua out to express her attitude. She was saying that she had the same attitude as Dong Chunhua on this matter. Yang Qindong was quite satisfied with this attitude, but if this was the only benefit, he would definitely not agree. It's not enough. Jianjie's words expressed his feelings. Yes. What else should I do? Please tell me, High Duke. As long as I can do it, I will do my best. Jin Ying also knew that throwing out Dong Chunhua was not enough to appease Yang Qindong's anger, even though he was already a second-rank official of the imperial court. Jin Ying's sensible behavior made Yang Qindong, who had been keeping a straight face, finally smile. It was easy to talk to smart people. At the very least, there was no need to waste so much time. All right, then I'll make a few requests. At the Dong residence in the capital, as the temporary emperor, Dong Chunhua had been in a rush to get close to him the moment he ascended the throne, and his life had been very smooth these last few years. Relying on his ability to see through the Son of Heaven and doing many things to cater to him, he had been promoted again and again. There was now news that he would be replacing the imperial censor of the left, Qin Yi, in the imperial censorate. Although they were both second-rank officials of the imperial court, there were still some differences between the left and the right. One's words carried enormous weight while the other had to look at the other's eyes. When he had been promoted from left deputy imperial censor to right imperial censor, Dong Chunhua had been extremely satisfied. But it didn't take long for him to have more pursuits, causing him to completely forget his duties. Everything he did was completely behind the acting emperor. Sometimes he even had to play the role of the acting emperor. Now his efforts were about to be repaid. Finally, his dreams were about to come true. How could he not be happy at this moment? Extreme joy begets sorrow. This was Dong Chunhua. Originally, he thought that he would be on the same level as the other ministers, but he never thought that such a thing would happen today. Being humiliated by Yang Qindong wasn't a big deal. After all, he was someone who could even force a minister to death. But the wrong thing was that the loyal duke shouldn't have been assassinated after this and almost lost his life. Even if Yang Qindong was dead, Dong Chunhua wouldn't be as scared as he was now. After all, what could a dead person do to him? Besides, once such a thing happened, the temporary emperor would definitely put someone like him in an important position and promote him in order to better stabilize the court. The problem was that the person didn't die. Looking at the cause of the matter, it was because he was poisoned by the food he ate that caused the other party to walk out of the Yang family manor, resulting in the assassination this time. Thinking about it from the beginning to the end, it seemed that he was the root of the disaster. Patting his conscience, Dong Chunhua really didn't know that there would be an assassination. Everything was really a coincidence. But now would anyone believe what he was saying? After knowing that Yang Qindong was surrounded and killed, Dong Chunhua was completely frightened. Following that, he kept praying in his heart, hoping that the assassins would succeed. When the housekeeper who was sent to inquire about the news came back and said that the loyal duke seemed to be injured, but it wasn't a big problem, he plopped back on the chair. He knew that this time he was really finished. Yang Qindong didn't die, and his appearance was too coincidental. There was no way to explain this matter, and presumably, no one would be willing to listen to his explanation. Even the temporary emperor wouldn't see him. Otherwise, wouldn't it mean that this matter was related to the emperor? Knowing that no one could save him, Dong Chunhua leaned on the chair like a stall. When the sky was already dark, suddenly, there was a huge commotion outside the residence. A group of embroidered uniform guards rushed into the residence like wolves and tigers. The person in the lead was the commander of the embroidered uniform guards, Lu Gui. Last time, a group of embroidered uniform guards also rushed into the Hu residence, but the leader was only a Baihu called Tong Lai. Now that Lu Gui had appeared, it was obvious that there was no turning back. Lu Gui flashed the driver's license in his hand, then he looked at the flustered Dong Chunhua and said, "Master Dong, you are suspected of being involved in the murder of an important official. You are suspected of colluding with a foreign country. Now please come with us." Since the charges had been laid out, Dong Chunhua naturally wouldn't admit it. He hurriedly shook his head and said, "No. It must be a misunderstanding. Everything is a misunderstanding. I want to see the emperor. I want to see the emperor." Dong Chunhua was still making a final struggle, but Lu Gui wouldn't give him such a chance. His eyes were cold as he shook his head. "Master Dong, you should save these words for the imperial edict and the cold torture instruments. Come, take him away." Dong Chunhua had been taken away. It could be foreseen that such a big thing had happened, almost taking the lives of Jin Ying and the commander of the brocade guards. In addition, Dai Zong also had to take an evasive attitude. His future was already set in stone and he would die without a doubt. At the same time, in the Yang Manor, the 9 members of the first guard who had died in battle were undergoing a solemn memorial service. Yang Qindong personally attended, his expression solemn. 2 years ago he had dealt with the Minister of Justice Yu Shiyue. 2 years later, another second-rank official was also arrested because he had offended the Duke of Loyalty. Once this matter was out, Yang Qindong's reputation was once again expanded. It also caused more people to fear the Duke from the bottom of their hearts. Not long after this incident, the imperial edict eunuch in the palace went to the Hu residence and announced a series of appointments. He appointed Hu Zhongning as a member of the embroidered uniform guards, secondary 3rd rank. Hu Zhongning was originally a guardian 5th rank, the right commander of the 5 cities military department, and the general guarding the Yongding Gate. This was the request that Yang Qindong had made to Jin Ying. With this assassination attempt, he had made it clear that he did not trust the Baiming army. Only his own father-in-law could be trusted. In order to repair the relationship between the two sides, Jin Ying expressed his agreement. However, this appointment still had to be reported to the emperor for the final decision. Now that the appointment had been announced, it was a sign that Zhu Qiyu was conceding. Yang Qindong was even more gratified. With these official positions and titles, if anything happened in the capital, the Hu clan would have the power to protect itself. There was no need to worry too much. In the imperial palace, Jin Ying was still kneeling in the main hall, her head lowered as she faced Zhu Qiyu on the golden dragon throne. She had already listed all of Yang Qindong's new requests. Other than the last one, the Duke of Loyalty's request for the title of king, all of his other requests had been approved. But because this request had not been approved, Jin Ying was forced to remain kneeling on the ground. "Rise." Seeing that Jin Ying had been kneeling ever since she had returned, Zhu Qiyu couldn't bear to see her kneeling. Today's incident had nothing to do with Jin Ying, and not only that, she had almost lost her life. Jin Ying gave her thanks and stood up, but she did not leave. She continued to stand with her head lowered. Although she said nothing, her desire for an explanation was obvious. "It's impossible to make him king. I'm not as stupid as some people who try to bribe people by making me king of a different surname. Give him a reply. In order to show our sincerity, We can think of other ways to compensate them. Zhu Qiu's words were resolute and decisive, and there was no room for discussion. There was one more thing that Zhu Qiu didn't say. For someone like Yang Qindong, even if you gave him the title of king, he wouldn't be able to use it. It would only strengthen his reputation. Therefore, he would never do such a thankless thing. Understanding the emperor's meaning, Jin Ying nodded. Although he was indebted to Yang Qindong for not killing him today, everything he had now was bestowed upon him by the emperor in front of him. Based on this, he was very clear about his position. Very quickly, Jin Ying sent someone to convey the emperor's intentions. He tactfully rejected the request to be conferred the title of king, saying that the time was not right. Then he proposed that in the future the supply of provisions to the first city could be transported from Tianjing to the capital. From there they could directly leave Jiong Pass and pass through Xian Manor and Tao City. Northern Ming would not set up any obstacles, and the mercenaries would only need to pay the required amount of money to pass through. Chapter 8:18. When Yang Qindong saw this news, he was in his study room. Standing beside him was the cautious director of the Security Bureau, Yang San. The previous director was Hu Mang. Later, because he had too many things to do, he completely put down this part-time job. Yang San concentrated his power, and because of this he did a lot of big things. Of course, it was inevitable that there were some mistakes. Don't look at how the words of the Security Bureau carried weight and everyone was afraid of him. But when he stood beside Yang Qindong, he was very obedient and stood obediently. Unless the sixth young master asked, he didn't dare to say a word. Tell me. Yang Qindong asked casually as he threw the booklet Jin Ying had sent onto the table. He leaned back in his chair and asked casually. There was only Yang San in the room. Of course, this question was asked to him. The director of the Security Bureau didn't answer immediately. He first thought about it before replying. At present, this is a very beneficial thing for both sides. We lack things and they lack money. This can be considered a win-win situation. Yang Qindong nodded gently. At present, this is the case. We should also seize this opportunity to transport more things from Qiqian City to the origin city. If one day the two sides have a falling out, we won't have to worry about the problem of food. Of course, the Security Bureau must pay attention to this matter and closely monitor the movements of all sides in the capital. Once there is a change in the situation, immediately make countermeasures and preparations. Yes. Yang San nodded heavily. By the way, what do you plan to do over there? Yang Qindong's chin moved slightly toward the south. After the Security Bureau used a lot of manpower and material resources, a telegram soon came from the capital of the Southern Ming dynasty. Although there was not enough evidence to prove it, various clues had pointed to Chao Yan, the adopted son of the chief eunuch Chao Jixiang. Yang San just reported this matter to the sixth young master. Young master, we have come up with a few plans to deal with the Southern Ming Empire's ministers. There is also a plan to deal with Chao Jixiang himself. This subordinate thinks that we can give it a try. Yang San carefully probed. As Xianxia's power continued to expand, he found that he couldn't understand his young master anymore. Yang Qindong's mouth twitched slightly after hearing this. Give him a taste of his own medicine? It seems feasible, but the success rate is too low. They will definitely be more careful. If we do this, not only will we not be able to kill them, but the strength of the Security Bureau's elites will also be damaged. It's not appropriate. Listening to Yang Qindong's concern for the Security Bureau, Yang San said gratefully, Thank you, young master, for your concern, but are we going to do nothing? That's not a bad suggestion. Yang Qindong suddenly laughed. Yang San was stunned when he heard this. He just said it casually, but why did the sixth young master take it seriously? Yang Qindong seemed to see the hesitation on Yang San's face. He chuckled and said, Sometimes, the greatest deterrent effect is to raise your hand but not drop it. Yang San quickly nodded in relief after hearing this sentence. I understand. Young master wants to hang a knife over their heads but not drop it. Let them live in fear and anxiety every day. That's right. Yang Qindong finally laughed. If they really killed a few ministers, the Security Bureau could do it by paying a price. However, if they did that, it would be too easy for them. They might as well do nothing and make the other party suspicious. Even if they had to scare them half to death, it would be better. We don't have to kill people, but we can't do nothing. Otherwise there will be no end to this. How about this? Send a telegram to my fourth brother and tell him to raise the prices of all the merchants from the southern Ming Empire by 5% as a warning. The smile on Yang Qindong's face faded, replaced by a trace of anger under his calm expression. Killing 9 of his soldiers and seriously injuring Xianxia, this matter couldn't be settled so easily. A 5% increase was enough to give the southern Ming merchants a headache. This way not only could Crimson City earn more money, but it could also weaken the economic strength of the southern Ming Empire. Could be considered killing 2 birds with 1 stone. When Yang San heard the 5% increase in the price of goods, his heart couldn't help but tighten. This was a good thing, but wouldn't Lord Yangxi's safety be worried? However, before he could ask the question in his heart, Yang Qindong had already replied, "Don't worry, nothing will happen to my fourth brother. After all, the other party did something wrong this time, so they won't bother about this matter. Other than obediently admitting their mistakes, they have no other choice. If they really have the guts to make a move on my fourth brother, then all of their business channels into the southern Ming Empire will be cut off. At that time the ones crying will only be themselves. If they did something wrong, they had to be prepared to accept the punishment. If they continued to make mistakes, then they would be seeking death." Yang Qindong could see this point. Presumably, Emperor Ingzong of the southern Ming Empire and the ministers under him could also see it clearly. Right now, the southern Ming Empire wasn't peaceful and its territory was shrinking. With Min Zhuangwang and the others eyeing the southwest covetously, if they were smart they wouldn't provoke him. Otherwise, it would be equivalent to forcing the mercenaries to join hands with Zhu Huizhen. In the new year of 1453 AD, Yang Qindong spent the new year in the Yang family manor. Even though an assassination had just happened, the manor had already made preparations, so the New Year's atmosphere was still very lively. A party that had been prepared for a long time diluted the previous assassination and made many people smile again. 9 days later, on the 9th day of the first month of the new year, Yang Qindong and his group left the Yang family manor and went from the outskirts of the capital to the Jiong Pass. Along with them were the 200 teachers and students of the Yang family academy, as well as the 2 madams and 7th sister Yang duo. It could be said that after leaving, the Yang family manor was basically empty. Other than the housekeeper Yang Ning, who stayed behind to take care of the business, only the servant Yang Lu stayed behind to handle the communication with the southern Ming Empire. Other than the 2 madams, Yang Qindong only brought along 7th sister Yang duo, who was already alone. The reason for this was because the other brothers and sisters had already settled down here. They couldn't leave as they wished like Yang duo. Yang Qindong tacitly agreed to the choice of his brothers and sisters. Perhaps if they stayed, Baiming would feel more at ease. As for whether or not they would act against his family when the relationship between the 2 sides broke down, he wasn't too worried. After all, these family members had lived in the capital for many years and had a certain amount of resources. Moreover, their father was Yang Rong, so they would probably have to think twice before acting. Moreover, with the help of Hu Xiao, Su Yozhen and the others, the outcome wouldn't be too bad. When the time came, he would make arrangements in advance. Speaking of Su Yozhen, after that sudden conversation he had finally adjusted his position. No matter how much he didn't think highly of the mercenary ship, he had already boarded it and could not back down. The only thing he could do was think about how to make this ship sail even further. Solving this problem could be considered a great harvest from this trip to the capital. Not long after Yang Qindong's group left the capital, another group quickly caught up. They first brushed shoulders with the Yang clan's group, and then they overtook them and took the lead. This group was led by Deng Chong, the eunuch of the Xian residence. During the negotiations, the 2 sides had already made it clear that Tulu City would be handed over to Northern Ming. This was a kind of goodwill that Yang Qindong expressed, and also an explanation to the people of the world. That was, the mercenaries were actually fighting for the Great Ming, fighting for the world. Only by doing this could the voices of the people gradually die down. Only by doing this could Zhu Qiu stabilize the situation in the court, concentrate on developing himself, and provide a safe supply route for the mercenaries. Deng Chong's group slowly advanced forward. They had no choice but to move slowly. The Yang clan's group had brought far too many things and there were also many women in the group. Thus, moving faster was an extravagant hope. Fortunately, after the new year the weather was slowly warming up, and there were no more incidents of people getting frostbite on the road. With Deng Chong's group at the front, the road was green without any accidents. They passed through Jiong Pass and arrived at the Xian residence. 1 month later they arrived at the Xian residence. Speaking of which, the Xian residence was Deng Chong's territory, and he had set up a banquet to entertain his guests. Yang Qindong once more met with the commander of the bureau, Shi Wanshan. Compared to the last time, Shi Wanshan's face was much more cordial this time. After all, when he received the guests last time, he still had to consider the opinions of his superiors. However, this time he was receiving the orders of his superiors. The atmosphere between them was much more relaxed. In this meeting, Yang Qindong had brought up the problem of the Han people's lives and status. He had bluntly pointed out that the Han people should have been the strongest people in the world, and that all other races should serve the Han people. Anyone who made the lives of the people so miserable that they couldn't even solve the problem of food and clothing was a piece of trash that should be reprimanded by the people of the world. In response to Yang Qindong's words, Shi Wanshan could only smile apologetically and nod his head. He was only a general temporarily residing in the Xian residence. When it came to the lives of the people, there wasn't much he could do. But he could still see Yang Qindong's domineering aura from these words, and a thought flashed through his mind. It seemed that it was a blessing for the Han people for such a person to become the ruler of the Han people. Naturally, this thought only flashed through his mind. He was now a second-rank general in the Baiming army. Since he was paid by others, he had to work for them. This was a principle that hadn't changed since ancient times. Chapter 8:19. In Xian City, Yang Qindong only stayed for 2 days before leaving. Deng Chong and Shi Wanshan followed everyone to Taoist City. In this city, Lu Zhua of the 2nd Reinforced Cavalry Regiment was waiting. When they saw Yang Qindong riding the white dragon horse in front of the team from afar, they excitedly greeted him. When they were still far away, they dismounted and saluted to show their respect and longing. Yang Qindong first returned a military salute, then looked at Shi Wanshan and Deng Chong and said, "Let me introduce you too. This is Lu Zhua, the commander of the 2nd Reinforced Mercenary Regiment. He is a fierce general." "Greetings, Commander Lu," Deng Chong and Shi Wanshan said with admiration. Lu Zhua naturally cupped his fist in return. After the two sides met, Yang Qindong said, "All right, this is Taoist City. I'll hand it over to you now. In the future, the provisions our mercenaries need will be delivered through here. When the time comes, I hope the two of you can make things convenient for us. Don't make everyone unhappy. It wouldn't be good if we fought." Yang Qindong still had a smile on his face as he spoke, but when he reached the end, his expression had already become a little more serious. It was as if he was a completely different person. Shi Wanshan and Deng Chong were shocked when they heard these words, but they didn't show it on their faces. They just smiled and said, No, we are all one family, one family. It's good. Even if you can see your friend off for 1,000 miles, there will always be a farewell. Let's part here." Yang Qindong laughed and squeezed the white dragon horse's belly with his legs. Immediately, the group of people passed through the deserted Taoist City and went straight to Xianxia City. Seeing Yang Qindong and the 2nd Reinforced Cavalry Regiment under the protection of Xiao Feng's Cold Vanguard Regiment and the 2nd Reinforced Cavalry Regiment, Shi Wanshan looked at their backs and said with emotion, "Eunuch Deng, don't you think this is letting the tiger return to the mountain?" "Silence," Deng Chong said nervously as if someone had stepped on his tail. He looked around and when he saw that no one was paying attention to them, he said softly, "General Shi, there are some things that we can't decide. We only need to complete the tasks assigned by the imperial court." Hey. Shi Wanshan pretended to be terrified and nodded repeatedly, but in his heart he was certain of the statement just now. Although he had only met Yang Qindong twice, he had a feeling that Yang Qindong was extraordinary. If he was not restrained, once he became powerful, he would turn into a dragon as soon as he encountered the wind and clouds. As for Yang Qindong, he didn't know how Wanshi Mountain would evaluate him. Even if he knew, he wouldn't care. Instead, he was curious that it was Lu Zhua who came to greet him instead of Tiger's Mane. The telegram that he was coming back had been sent a few days ago. By right, Tiger's Mane should have come to welcome him personally. Could it be that there was a problem in the first city? With confusion, Yang Qindong asked Commander Lu Zhua who came to greet him. Yes. Lu Zhua nodded without hiding anything. In front of Yang Chendong he didn't dare to lie. Not long after the new year, there was a sudden movement in the northwest. The Mongol army of the Gobi Desert suddenly sent troops to attack Wandu. The general guarding the city, Mu Ren, was defeated and retreated with his troops. Since then that place became the territory of the Gobi Desert Mongol army. But that place was too close to our first city. It was only more than 200 miles away. Under the rapid movement of the cavalry, it would soon threaten our safety. Commander Tiger was worried that there would be problems in the future, so he took advantage of the fact that the other party had not yet gained a firm foothold and deployed troops to attack there. There was really no time to come to Tala City to pick up the 6th young master, so he arranged for me to come with the 2nd Cavalry Regiment. Take down Wandu? Yang Chendong listened to Lu Zhu's introduction and nodded first. If this was the case, Wandu would absolutely not be allowed to be touched by others. As the saying goes, how could one allow others to sleep beside one's bed? But the problem came again. Even if everyone understood this problem, what did the Gobi Desert Mongol army think? They knew that the mercenaries would not give up and would not allow them to touch the surrounding area of the first city. So why did they occupy that place? At this time there was still snow on the grassland. It was not a good season for grazing. Even if it was, a small place like Wandu should not let the Gobi Desert Mongol army take such a big risk. Intuition suddenly told Yang Chendong that something was not right. Yang Chendong's expression changed and he said to Beta Persei beside him, "Quick, send a telegram immediately to ask the first city if Tiger's Mane has sent troops. If not, ask them to postpone it." Seeing the 6th young master's expression change dramatically, Beta Persei quickly agreed and asked someone to send a telegram. Not long after there was a reply to the telegram. Tiger's Mane had already set off 3 days ago and should have already fought with the Gobi Desert Mongol army. Speed up the march and get back to the first city as soon as possible. Yang Chendong, who heard the news, stopped talking and took the initiative to speed up. In view of Yang Chendong's performance, the others also began to speed up involuntarily. Only half a day later, a new telegram was sent to Yang Chendong. Sure enough, as he had guessed, something had happened. In the telegram it said that the city of Wandu was a trap. The mercenaries were caught off guard and fell into the trap. The army suffered heavy losses. In the end, the Tatar cavalry led by Su He fought desperately to open up a bloody path. Now they had fled back to the first city and the pursuers were close to the first city. There was a long list of losses at the bottom of the telegram. Looking at the introduction above, the independent division lost 4 battalions and more than half of the Tatar cavalry regiment lost more than 1,500 people. Of the 3 newly formed regiments of new recruits, 2 of them had lost around 4,000 men. The most miserable one was the cavalry regiment, which had a total of 3,200 men. In the end, less than 500 managed to escape. Among them, the commander of the 2nd Battalion, Gao Danhua, had died in battle, while the commander of the 1st Battalion, Deng Yu, had been seriously injured. Looking at the bloody numbers on the telegram, the mercenaries lost 10,000 people in this battle and countless people were injured. Yang Chendong's face was terrifyingly gloomy at this moment. After 6 to 7 breaths, he suddenly raised his head and said fiercely, "Reinforce the 2nd Cavalry Regiment. Leave 2 battalions to escort the madams back to the first city. The remaining battalion will pull the wooden carriage and bring Commander Xiaofeng's Cold Vanguard Regiment to the first city with me." 10,000 people were killed in the battle and countless people were injured. This was the largest number of casualties since the mercenaries were established. At the same time, it could be considered a serious injury. However, what was even more terrifying was that the current origin city was already in danger. If the city was in danger, he was afraid that such a long time of effort would be in vain. This was definitely not what Yang Chendong wanted to see. After the order was given, the carriage was dismantled into pieces of wooden planks. On them sat the Cold Vanguard soldiers who held the 95 style. Fortunately, there was heavy snow on the road. With the help of the snow, it was not difficult to pull them up. At this moment, Xiaofeng's Cold Vanguard Regiment had 1,300 people and Ma Xiongxian's reinforced battalion had 1,000 people. A total of 2,300 people flew toward the first city. At this time in the first city, Tiger's Mane looked haggard and his face was very ugly. He who had been with the young master for the longest time, had always wanted to use his strength to prove himself and tell others that he did not rely on his qualifications to become the leader of a division. It could be said that this idea was good, but because he was too eager and too anxious, when he saw that Huan City, which was only 200 li away, had changed hands, he did not even wait for Yang Qindong to arrive before he began to mobilize his troops. Or rather, he did not want to wait for the return of the sixth young master. He just wanted to fight a beautiful battle to prove himself. However, he never expected that he would return in defeat. 10,000 soldiers died in battle, countless were injured, and the first city was in danger of being surrounded. The scouts at the front had already sent news that the Mongolian army in the desert had already arrived outside the city. They were less than 20 miles away from the greenhouse plantation. The generals below were all asking for instructions on what to do. Although the greenhouse plantation was only a mere 2,000 mu of land and was really nothing, it was arranged by the sixth young master to be planted. The vegetables that appeared in it once made the Mongolian people call the god of war the messenger of the immortal heaven. It was already a symbol, and the symbolic meaning was greater than the actual meaning. Such a place absolutely could not be lost. Otherwise, without waiting for the sixth young master to scold him, Tiger's Mane would not be able to get over this hurdle in his heart. Men, bring out the 6 firearm battalions of the independent division. The others will guard the city. Even if I die on the battlefield, you are not allowed to open the city gate and take a step out of the first city. Tiger's Mane made up his mind. Since the bad situation was caused by his poor command, then he had to personally stand up and solve this problem. Although he did not know if he could do it, at least he would use all his strength and even pay with his life. Yang Qindong was not here, so the commander of the army in the city was Tiger's Mane. In this aspect, even Yu Mian could not be compared to him. He gave the order. Even if the officers below had different opinions, they could only endure it. There was strict discipline in the army. Once the commander gave a military order, even if it was wrong, they had to carry it out. Everything had to wait until the war was over. When the conclusion was made, everyone would have the freedom to express their own opinions. Leaving Commander Su He to guard the city, Tiger's Mane led 6 battalions of firearm soldiers out of the city. When he arrived at the greenhouse plantation, the enemy was already less than 5 miles away from him. Everyone find a suitable formation. As long as the enemy dares to come, beat them all back. Tiger's Mane put his hands on his waist and roared with a cold face at Vice Commander Xen Honghai and the 6 battalion commanders. 6 battalions, more than 2,000 soldiers armed with Type 81 rifles spread out in units, forming a huge temporary battlefield. The straight line of the battlefield reached a distance of several miles. The mercenaries set up a strict formation, and the enemy on the other side also stopped in their tracks. They did not immediately launch an attack. Instead, they set up camp, buried pots and cooked rice, and put on an unhurried appearance. Chapter 8:20. In the temporary tent, Suede sat at the head of the table. As the main commander of this battle and the one who had sent the most troops, he had the right to sit in this position. However, the people sitting on the left and right of the Khan were even more surprising. Speaking of which, they were Yang Qindong's old friends Aga Dorji and Fan Yuhai. Needless to say, Agar Dorji's 50,000 cavalry had been defeated at the hands of Yang Qindong, and even his son Hararoku had been lost. If General Su He had not stepped in at the critical moment, he and his son would not have been able to escape. However, when they were completely safe and no one could threaten them, when the father and son were finally reunited, not only were they not grateful to Su He, they even scolded him for being disloyal after drinking. This strange father and son even blamed Su He for their defeat, believing that it was because he was greedy and afraid of death that he did not fulfill his responsibilities, which led to the final defeat. They had been brooding over this matter and had been looking for an opportunity to take revenge. It was at this time that they encountered another cavalry unit on the grassland. Both sides immediately got on their horses and carriages as if they were going to fight. But in the end, they did not fight because the other party's general took the initiative to come out and say that he wanted to have a good talk with them. From afar, Agar Dorji noticed that the enemy had about 15,000 cavalry, which was about the same as his own army. But the difference was that he had brought some defeated soldiers and some men who had just been abducted from all over the grassland. Once the battle started, he wasn't completely sure how much combat strength they could exert. He wasn't even completely sure if they would turn around and run away when the battle started. With such an army, it was naturally best to avoid a fight if possible. Just like this, Agar Dorji met with the enemy General Fan Yuhai in front of the two armies. Through their conversation he learned about the other party's background. Unexpectedly, the other party was also a defeated army that had escaped from the Jiaoxi kingdom in the south of the Great Ming dynasty. Even the other party's cavalry was mostly captured and plundered along the way, which was very similar to his own. However, this was not the end of it. What was even more similar was that they had both been defeated by Yang Chendong. At this time the two sides had found a common language and for a time, they hit it off and regretted that they had not met earlier. What was even more rare was that this general called Fan Yuhai took the initiative to lower his status, stating that as long as they could defeat Yang Chendong's mercenaries, he was willing to respect Agar Dorji, which made the latter very happy. Originally he thought that he had lost his main army, and he did not know how long it would take for him to rise again. Who would have thought that an opportunity appeared so soon? Overjoyed, he immediately agreed, and the two sides became allies with Agar Dorji as the leader. Fan Yuhai was a famous general in Jiaoxi, and had even brought a lot of trouble to Yang Chendong. However, because this person was very good at seeing the big picture, every time the situation was dangerous, he would always be the first to escape, which made Yang Chendong unable to catch him several times. After several exchanges, Fan Yuhai could also see that he was really not Yang Chendong's opponent. Although he was a proud person and usually did not put others in his eyes, he had to admit in his heart that whether it was the grasp of the battlefield or the fighting strength of the army, he was indeed inferior to Yang Chendong. Fan Yuhai could not help but feel like he was born in the east. Then he made an important decision, and that was to leave the south and go to the north. He heard that the grasslands there were fertile and very suitable for raising horses. Moreover, the people there were more martial spirit because of the climate and environment. In his eyes, these conditions were undoubtedly very tempting. With his ability and wisdom, it should not be a problem for him to carve out a piece of the world and create the strongest cavalry in the world. With these thoughts in mind, Fan Yuhai set off. After passing through dense forests and mountains, they finally arrived at the grassland after suffering countless hardships. However, he soon realized that there was a huge difference between what he had heard and the actual situation. Who said that grasslands had to be fertile? Most of the places he saw were deserts, and the degree of desolation shocked him several times. It was said that the south was a barren land, but in Fan Yuhai's eyes, it was far inferior to this boundless desert. However, since he had already made his choice, Fan Yuhai certainly wouldn't turn back. He could only make up his mind and continue to walk forward. Along the way he also encountered some small tribes. Of course he would snatch whatever he could and take whatever he could. This allowed him to expand his original 5,000 elite soldiers to the current 15,000. The army grew stronger and finally walked out of the desert and into the grasslands. Then he met Agar Dorji and learned more about this place. Fan Yuhai, who had always been known for his forbearance and intelligence, immediately decided to form an alliance with him and even respect him. He did not make such a decision because he was sincerely submitting to him. Instead, he wanted to use this opportunity to inquire about more things and understand more about the situation in this place. How could Agar Dorji know about this? Fan Yuhai being so obedient and tactful made him happy. At the same time, he answered almost all of Fan Yuhai's questions and explained the situation of this grassland without much effort. Fan Yuhai kept a smile on his face, but only the heavens knew how shocked he was in his heart. He lamented his bad luck to meet Yang Chendong here, and at the same time he also lamented the speed at which Yang Chendong developed. Of course, there was also a voice in his heart that told him that this was his chance to turn the tables. Generally speaking, Fan Yuhai wanted to turn the tables not only because he had been defeated time and time again by Yang Chendong, but also because he wanted to get back at Yang Chendong. It was also because he realized that the forces here were intertwined with each other and were mainly cavalry. This way they could greatly suppress the power of the muskets. Wasn't this an environment that could greatly reduce the strength of both sides exactly what he wanted? With the idea of turning the tables, Fan Yuhai began to think. He proposed the idea of allying with the Mongol tribes of the Gobi Desert to deal with the mercenaries together. At first, Agar Dorji did not agree with this idea. First, their relationship was not good. Back then he had wanted to snatch Sud Khan's daughter to be his daughter-in-law. Second, his strength was not as good as Sud Khan's, and if they formed an alliance, it would be difficult for him to take the lead. This was something that Agar Dorji, who was used to having his entire army move at a single command, could not accept. Who was Fan Yuhai? He was the best at reading people's minds. He quickly found Agar Dorji's concerns and said that no matter who the alliance was, he was willing to respect them. At the same time, he also said that he was willing to persuade Sud Khan. Once they succeeded, they would join forces to attack the mercenaries. If they won, it would be easy to share the benefits. If they lost, it would be fine. Once the opportunity was right, they could swallow the Mongol tribes of the desert. There was a large amount of land there and countless horses and sheep. It was enough for them to rise from the ashes. After some persuasion, Agar Dorji saw hope again and finally agreed. Fan Yuhai also followed the direction that Agar Dorji pointed to. After entering the Mongol tribes of the desert, he quickly convinced Sud Khan. It was also easy to find an excuse. He directly said that the strength of the mercenaries was a threat to the existence of all the grassland tribes. In addition, he allowed Agadorji's tribe to continue to grow, so he might as well call them over to watch over them. If there was a chance, he could directly devour the cavalry under his command. This was also a way to strengthen himself. After some consideration, Sud Khan agreed to this decision. Just as Fan Yuhai said, he did not want to see the mercenaries grow stronger and become a threat to himself. He also wanted to swallow Agar Dorji's tribe completely. In the end, he agreed. At this point, the alliance of the three forces was quickly formed under Fan Yuhai's guidance. The next step was to choose the location of the battle. After some investigation, Wandu was the most suitable place. The battle that Fan Yuhai had planned was about to begin. As expected, Tiger's Mane was tricked and was heavily injured. The myth of the mercenaries being invincible was broken. In the tent, Sud Khan was sitting in the main seat, his face full of joy. In the Battle of Wanda City, he had beheaded 10,000 enemies and injured countless enemies. This was the humiliation of his previous two defeats. On the battlefield, they had obtained countless horses and sabers. He had seen those things and they were indeed very sharp and tough. They were much stronger than the sabers in their hands. With such a harvest, Sud Khan was in a good mood. What made him even more excited was that this battle had broken the myth of the mercenaries being invincible. The originally low morale had been boosted, and some of the disloyal people in the tribe had become much more obedient. All of this was thanks to Fan Yuhai, who was sitting on the right. At this moment, he looked at Fan Yuhai with eyes full of admiration, so much so that an idea popped up in his mind. In order to rope this person in, could he keep him by his side through marriage? Fan Yuhai was 38 years old. From this point of view, he was older than Tuoya and could even barely be her father. However, since it was a marriage, he naturally would not consider such a problem. In order to deepen the relationship between the two sides, there were many cases in history of old men over 60 years old marrying teenage girls. As long as he could achieve his goal, this was not a problem. Sud Khan looked at Fan Yuhai fervently and his voice became much warmer. General Fan, in your opinion, what should we do next? Do you even need to ask? Of course, we'll just fight. Halajuo, who was standing behind Agar Dorji, did not wait for others to say anything and took the initiative to speak. Chapter 8:21. For his son's rude behavior, Agar Dorji didn't think it was wrong at all. On the contrary, he nodded approvingly. My son is right. Now that we have defeated the mercenaries, the scouts have also sent news that the number of mercenaries in the beginning city is less than 10,000. This is the best time for us to follow up the victory. Haha, there are a lot of provisions and 70,000 people in the city. They are all wealth. As he spoke, Agar Dorji already had a greedy look on his face. It was exactly the same as Har Dorji behind him. They were indeed father and son. Yes. Sud Khan also nodded after hearing this. He also had the same opinion. In his opinion, since they could severely injure more than 10,000 mercenaries before, then the 10,000 wounded people in the city were not a concern. Among the three people in the alliance, two of them nodded. Logically speaking, they had set the rules for this matter. But for some reason, Fan Yuhai didn't say anything, and the two of them didn't rush to give orders. Because Fan Yuhai didn't say anything, the atmosphere in the tent slowly became quiet. In the Battle of Wanda City, this person had proven his ability with practical actions. At this moment, Everyone looked at him respectfully, waiting for his final decision. Among the crowd, only Har Dorji had a look of impatience. In his opinion, Fan Yuhai was nothing special. He was just lucky and defeated the mercenaries once. This didn't prove that he was the best. However, even his father didn't say anything. Of course, he couldn't stand up and criticize Fan Yuhai. Time ticked by. Seeing that Fan Yuhai was still deep in thought, Sudor Khan couldn't hold it in any longer and asked, "General Fan, is there something wrong? Is there something wrong?" Fan Yuhai finally raised his head. His face looked very solemn. "What's wrong?" Agar Dorji's mouth was quick. He leaned forward and looked impatient. If this person didn't say anything, he wouldn't give up. Report. At this moment, the voice of a scout suddenly came from outside the tent. Then a man wearing a typical Mongolian costume entered the tent and knelt on the ground. He looked up and said to Sud Khan, "Khan, the scout found an army in the southeast. There are about 2,000 people." "Army? Have you found out who it is?" Suda's confident smile disappeared in an instant. Could it be that a nearby tribe saw an opportunity and wanted to take a share of the pie? Without making the Sud wait for too long, the kneeling scout raised his head and said, reporting to the Khan, "It's too far away to see clearly, but judging from the flag it should be the flag of the war god." "What?" At this moment not only did Sudar yell out in surprise, even Agadorji, who was sitting on the left, had a look of shock on his face. When ancient armies marched to war, they would each have their own flag, just like mercenaries. Most of them would use the 5-star flag, but wherever Yang Chendong appeared, unless they wanted to hide their identity, they would hang the 2 words "War God" to show their military might. Since the scout said that the other party was using the flag of the war god, needless to say, it should be Yang Chendong who appeared. As the saying goes, a person's name is like a tree's shadow. When they heard the name Yang Chendong, it was normal for the 3 people who had lost to him to change their expressions. The reason why they dared to set a trap in Yunda City was because they knew that Yang Chendong had gone to Baiming's capital and was not in the origin city. Otherwise, it was unknown whether they would dare to fight with the mercenaries so openly. Sud Khan and Agadorji did not speak. Even Fan Yuhai, who was sitting on the right, did not speak. They all needed time to digest the news they had just received. The scouts on the grassland were fast, had good horsemanship, and were very vigilant. However, they had a fatal weakness, which was that they could only show off in their own territory. They were not strong enough to extend their tentacles to other places, such as Baiming's capital. They did not have any basis for when Yang Chendong would come back. Everything was just guessing. But at such a critical time, the other party appeared and caught them off guard. After an unknown period of time, Sud Khan, who was sitting at the head of the table, finally could not help but say, "Everyone, what should we do next? Should we fight or not? Why should we not fight?" Haruo did not wait for the others to express their opinions and was the first to speak. He was captured by Yang Chendong and regarded it as the greatest shame of his life. Even in his dreams he was thinking about how to turn the tables. Now that they had finally grasped the advantage, if they retreated just because they heard a name, wouldn't it prove that they were afraid of the great Ming's loyal duke? If they did not even have the courage to fight, how could they talk about revenge? "Shut up." Unlike before when he allowed his son to interrupt, Agar Dorji finally scolded and then closed his mouth tightly. Back then the 50,000 soldiers were defeated by Yang Chendong. This was indeed a shadow in his heart, a shadow that could not be erased and even made him afraid when he thought of it. Seeing Agar Dorji's performance, Sud Khan was very disappointed. Previously he was so fearless and looked like he was going to attack the first city. Now just a name scared him to this extent. Such an ally wanted to achieve great things, it could only be a joke. Since he didn't have much hope for Agar Dorj, Swade could only look at Fan Yuhai. Fan Yuhai was calm and collected, so his decisions were highly valued. Fan Yuhai was indeed deep in thought at this moment. His understanding of Yang Chendong was no less than Suda and the others. In fact, he knew more. Because of this, he was very clear about what kind of ability this person had. To be honest, he was not prepared to fight with Yang Chendong because he did not have the slightest confidence in winning. Sud Khan was still Agar Dorji. Although he also had a large number of soldiers, they were all cavalry. However, when facing Yang Chendong, would he be able to display his full strength? Sud Khan felt that it was impossible. It was not easy for him to have the courage to rush up and not run away. A real man knows when to yield and when to stand tall. Since he knows that he can't win, then he won't fight. In any case, the battle had just begun. If he wanted to fight, there would be many opportunities in the future. Let's retreat. The advantage of cavalry is in charging on the battlefield, not sieging and conquering. This time the other party is prepared, so it will be difficult for us to gain any benefits. Since that's the case, it is better to wait for the other party to attack us. In that case, in a mobile battle, the power of their guns will be reduced to the minimum, which is the most beneficial for us. After thinking for a while, Fan Yuhai finally made a decision. After hearing this, he could even hear Sud Khan and Agar Dorji heaving a sigh of relief. Good. Since that's the case, I also agree to withdraw. Just as Agar Dorji finished speaking, Sud Khan nodded. Since that's the case, we will retreat to Wanda City first and look for an opportunity. The Mongol Alliance army, who had been eyeing the first city covetously and wanted to destroy the first city, retreated. When Yang Qindong arrived with Xiao Feng's cold vanguard regiment, he saw the other party retreating. Sixth young master, should we charge up? Ma Xiangshan's eyes were filled with killing intent as he asked excitedly. No need. Yang Qindong shook his head. Xiao Feng's cold vanguard regiment had just come into contact with war horses, so their horsemanship training still needed to be strengthened. At this time they gave up the advantage of guns and charged up. Even if they fought, they would not have much chance of winning. Once they forced the other party, they might be bitten back. This was not what he wanted to see. Right now, stabilizing the situation in the first city and restoring the fighting power of the soldiers was the right thing to do. As for the enemy in front of him, he would let them be proud for 2 days. The enemy retreated. Yang Qindong did not intend to chase after them. He brought the somewhat disappointed Xiao Feng's regiment and Ma Xiangshan's battalion back to the first city. At the city gate, in the cold weather, Tiger's Mane was kneeling naked with a few dried branches tied to his back. Behind him there was a group of officers kneeling. Among them Su He Xuefeng and the others were also in the crowd. He. Seeing this scene, Yang Qindong could not help but laugh out loud. He actually played the game of carrying a bramble and asking for forgiveness. This made him feel like crying and laughing. Yang Qindong, who was riding on the white dragon horse, actually laughed. This scene was seen by some officers and they did not know what to do. After such a defeat, shouldn't the sixth young master be angry or even very angry? What was the meaning of this smile? No one could see through Yang Qindong's meaning and thoughts. All they could do was to lower their heads even more. They just hoped that the sixth young master would not notice them. After all, losing a battle was not a glorious thing. If they were remembered at this time, wouldn't they be asking for trouble? Everyone knelt on the ground and did not say a word. It was not until Yang Qindong led the army to the city gate that he looked at the kneeling people that he finally opened his mouth and said, "What? Is this how you welcome me?" Facing Yang Qindong's questioning, no one dared to remain silent. Especially Tiger's Mane, who had the highest military position. He was the first to raise his head and said with a pained expression, "Young master, we did something wrong. Please punish me." All right. Victory and defeat are common in war. After all, we didn't lose the city. Everyone get up. Yang Qindong had a smile on his face. There was no trace of anger. This extremely abnormal scene made many of the officers who were originally worried feel much more at ease. That's right. This time they had lost the battle, but everyone had put in a lot of effort. They could only blame the enemy for being too cunning. Chapter 8:22. Under Yang Qindong's signal, Beta Persei also found a military coat and put it on Tiger's Mane. Then everyone followed the sixth young master into the city. Although they had only been away for 3 months, the atmosphere in the city had changed. It was not as noisy as before. Even the number of people walking on the streets seemed to have decreased a lot. This was the reaction and result after a defeat. Yang Qindong saw this, but he did not say a word. The team arrived at the Yang mansion. After Xiao Feng's group was settled in the barracks, Tiger's Mane, Windchaser, and Su He all knelt on the ground. They were smart enough to know that this was the time for the sixth young master to punish them. Yang Qindong did not reprimand them in front of so many people because he wanted to save them face. After all, they were all leaders. If they were scolded too harshly in front of their subordinates, It would not be beneficial for them to lead and command troops in the future. Since there were no outsiders, Yang Qindong casually found a chair and sat down. He glanced at the three people kneeling on the ground and said, "Tell me what's going on?" Although he knew from the telegram that they were defeated, it did not explain what had happened. Without understanding, there was no right to speak. Yang Qindong wanted to know how the other party defeated Tiger's Mane and the others. After all conspiracies and tricks depended on one's own strength in the end. He was like a 3-year-old child. No matter how good he was at scheming, it would be difficult for him to defeat a 20-year-old strong man. "It's like this," Tiger's Mane said. Su He and Windchaser added on. The process of the matter was clearly shown in front of Yang Qindong. The Mongols of Gobi Desert suddenly launched a large-scale attack on Wandu. To the outside world, the reason was that they had betrayed the Mongols of Gobi Desert. They were here to seek revenge. Mu Ren, the general of Yundu who had a guilty conscience and whose military strength was far inferior to the other side, wisely chose to leave and give up the city. After the news spread to the beginning city, Tiger's Man gathered the officers for a meeting. After discussion, they finally decided to take down Wanda City to reduce the threat that could threaten their existence at any time. After the decision was made, the corresponding military plan was carried out. The Independent Division was the main offensive force. Vice Division Commander Xen Honghai led 8 battalions and the 1st New Recruit Regiment to carry out the mission. On the left, the 1st Cavalry Regiment was the main offensive force. Regiment Commander Zhui Feng led the 1st New Recruit Regiment and the 2nd New Recruit Regiment followed. On the right, the Tatar Cavalry Regiment was the main offensive force. Regiment Commander Su He led the 3rd New Recruit Regiment followed. A total of 16,000 people launched a fierce attack on the city. Division Commander Tiger's Man would lead the remaining 8 battalions of the Independent Division, as well as Su Yunxing's Reconnaissance Battalion and Logistics Battalion to stay behind. They would be in charge of the security of the city and the supply of the army. Even 3 new regiments were sent out. This in itself was enough to explain the problem. This was originally a training operation. It was to bring the new recruits to experience the atmosphere of the battlefield, so that they could adapt to this environment faster and better. It was just a Wanda city. Facing the Mongol troops of the Gobi Desert who had been defeated by them again and again, no one put them in their eyes. And the facts also proved that it didn't take long to take down Wanda city. The army just charged and scared the enemy away and occupied the city. And all the changes began to happen from this moment. Just as the army occupied Wanda City and was cheering for victory, suddenly one explosion after another sounded in the city, followed by flames that soared high into the sky. The unprepared mercenaries were hit head-on. The explosion and flames devoured their lives and disrupted their battle formation. After the event, the number of soldiers who were burned to death by the explosion was close to 5,000. Other than that, there were at least 2,000 soldiers who were injured or burned. The chaos didn't end there. After the explosion and flames, countless Mongol cavalry appeared from all around Wanda City. They fired their bows and charged forward like a tornado in the desert. Without any preparation, the soldiers didn't know their generals and the generals didn't know their soldiers. In the chaotic battlefield, facing the sudden appearance of the Mongol cavalry, the mercenaries panicked. On the battlefield, there was a one-sided situation and a one-sided massacre had begun. At this point, Tiger's Mane raised his head and looked at the silent Yang Qindong and said, "The generals are still very brave." Many of the soldiers who were burned took the initiative to take up the role of providing cover. For example, Gao Danhua, the 2nd Battalion commander of the 1st Cavalry Reinforced Regiment, was in the sea of flames. More than 40% of his body was burned, but he still raised his sword and led the soldiers to charge at the enemy. In the end, he died on the battlefield. In this battle, we lost 10,000 soldiers and more than 4,000 were injured. Young master, it's all my fault. I made a mistake in my command. Please punish me. At the end of his speech, Tiger's Mane knocked his head on the ground again and again. Soon his forehead started to bleed, drop by drop. Enough. In the dull hall, Yang Qindong's roar finally came out. "You are not sorry to me but to the soldiers who died on the battlefield. Do you know how many families their deaths brought pain that can't be erased for a lifetime?" With this roar, Tiger's Mane didn't dare to make a sound. He just lowered his head and cried. Wind-chasing Wolf and Su He, who were kneeling on the side, also looked very gloomy. This time Hu Mang, who was the commander of the army, was mainly responsible. But as his deputy he didn't stop it and didn't find the problem. He was also guilty. The room became quiet again. After Yang Qindong shouted, his chest kept rising and falling. It was obvious that he was really angry. Beta Persei saw all of this and was also very worried. He stepped forward and whispered, "Young master, take care of your body. It's bad for your body to be angry." Yang Qindong sighed and then waved his hand. "Forget it. This time you are indeed responsible. But where did the fire come from? How did the Mongolian tribe in the north set you on fire? This is the main reason. Let me ask you, have you found out the reason?" No. Tiger's mane raised his head again, but the shame on his face was even heavier. This result seemed to be within Yang Qindong's expectations. He could also understand. After losing to such an extent, everyone was only thinking about how to defend the city. How could they have time to think about other things? He didn't say anything about it and just summed up this defeat. "The three of you are senior officers. Each of you will be recorded with a major demerit and your salary will be deducted for a year. If you commit the same mistake again, you will be removed from the military. Do you have any objections?" No. Tiger's mane and the other two couldn't help but tremble when they heard this. That was a major demerit. This was a very serious warning. According to the rules, if they committed the same mistake again within a year, they would have no chance to be in the military. However, compared to the soldiers who died, this result was not so hard to accept. Alright, I'll say it again. There is no such thing as a permanent victory in war. Since we lost today, we need to learn from our experience and not make the same mistake again. Now let's think about how to raise the morale of the soldiers. Just now you said that everyone's performance in the battle was not bad. Do you have any examples? Yang Qindong had already punished them. The dead could not be brought back to life. He had to continue his career. He couldn't just stop because of a defeat. Yes, there is. Tiger's mane raised his head and immediately reported what he heard and understood. A new idea began to form in Yang Qindong's mind with these reports. On the third day after Yang Qindong entered the origin city, his family also came to the origin city. Before they came, they had heard a lot about this city, but everything was just in their imagination. However, when they really entered this place, all kinds of exclamations naturally came out from their mouths. The origin city was naturally much worse than the capital of Baiming. It was even a little worse than the old city like Xian Mansion. However, after walking through the snow and seeing the vast white grassland, it was very difficult to see such a big city here. After only 2 days, the number of people on the streets of the city had begun to increase. The messenger of longevity heaven had returned. The god of war had returned. This was like a shot in the arm for everyone, allowing the people in the city to see hope again. If Yang Qindong's return was a kind of spiritual stimulation, then the compensation for the soldiers' death that was distributed to the people in the past 2 days was real. They could see and feel the benefits. Under Yang Qindong's order, the treasury in the city was opened. More than half of the accumulated money was taken out to pay the families and relatives of the soldiers who died in the battle. When the real money was openly sent to the families of the Mongolian people by the mercenaries, the shock naturally appeared. The Mongolians were said to be a race on horseback because they had been in contact with the idea of the weak being prey to the strong since they were young. They paid attention to the strong being respected. The strong enjoyed everything and got everything. As for the weak or even the dead, no matter how powerful they were when they were alive, they were just a pile of white grain after death. Just like Genghis Khan, he lived at the bottom for several years after his father's death. The strong enjoyed everything and the dead turned into ashes. This seemed to have become an iron law on the grassland. But now Yang Qindong had broken all the rules. The families of the dead soldiers received generous compensation in gold and silver. Although this couldn't bring the dead back to life and couldn't make some people forget the joy of losing their loved ones, it was still better than not receiving anything. Especially when they received a lot. The dead soldiers each received at least 50 taels of compensation. Those who were officers would receive even more. You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.